Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was reincarnated as a god and got married to the goddesses Gabriel DXD Hestia. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. Divine Awakening. The last thing Naruto remembered was pain. Not the dull ache of exhaustion that had become his constant companion during the war, but the sharp, unmistakable sensation of being torn apart from the inside. The 10 Tails chakra had been too much, even for him, but he'd held on long enough, just long enough for everyone to escape. Now there was nothing, no pain, no sound, no sensation at all. Am I dead? His voice echoed strangely, as if speaking underwater. Not exactly the right question, came a gentle, amused response. Though I suppose it's not entirely wrong either. Naruto's eyes snapped open. He hadn't realized they were closed. Above him stretched an endless expanse of stars against a midnight blue backdrop that somehow looked both distant and close enough to touch. He was lying on what appeared to be a floor of polished marble that reflected the starlight like still water. A woman stood over him, studying him with curious emerald eyes. Her long green hair cascaded over elegant white robes adorned with gold trim. A golden staff topped with an orb was clasped loosely in her right hand, and something about her radiated power in a way that made his skin tingle. "Who are you?" Naruto asked, pushing himself up to sitting position. "Where am I?" "My name is Palutena, goddess of light," she replied with a slight bow of her head. "And as for where you are, this is the divine nexus. The crossroads between realms where gods convene." Naruto stared at her, waiting for the punchline. When none came, he laughed nervously. "Right, and I'm the sage of 6 paths." "No," Palutena said, her expression serious despite the hint of amusement dancing in her eyes. "You're Naruto Uzumaki, formerly the 7th Hokage of Konohagakure, Jinchuriki of Kurama the 9-tailed fox, and now." She paused, tilting her head slightly. "Well, that's what we're here to figure out." The mention of his titles brought a flood of memories rushing back. The final battle, the village under attack, his decision to absorb the power of all the tailed beasts to stop the otherworldly invaders. Kurama's warnings, Hinata's tears, Boruto and Himawari screaming as Sakura and Sasuke pulled them away. "They're safe," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "I made sure they're safe." Palutena's expression softened. "Yes, they are. Your sacrifice ensured that." "Sacrifice?" Naruto's eyes widened. "So I am dead. Your mortal form has passed, yes." She extended a hand to help him up. "But your essence, that's where things get interesting." Naruto ignored her offered hand and jumped to his feet. A lifetime of battle reflexes keeping him wary. "What does that mean? Just tell me straight. What happened to me?" "You've been reincarnated," Palutena said simply. "But not as a mortal. The combined power of the tailed beasts, your own life force, and the unique circumstances of your sacrifice created something unprecedented. You've become divine." Naruto stared at her, waiting for the words to make sense. "Divine? Like a god? That's ridiculous, is it?" Palutena asked, gesturing around them. "Look at yourself, Naruto." For the first time, Naruto glanced down at his body. He was wearing what looked like his Hokage robes, but instead of the traditional red and white, they were a deep orange with black flame patterns crawling up from the hem. Symbols he didn't recognize were embroidered in gold along the edges. But what truly caught his attention was his skin. It seemed to glow faintly from within, as if light itself coursed through his veins. "This doesn't prove anything," he muttered, though uncertainty had begun to creep into his voice. "It could be a genjutsu, or you could be in the afterlife, speaking to a goddess about your unexpected ascension to divinity." Palutena finished for him. She didn't seem offended by his skepticism. If anything, she appeared to find it refreshing. "You haven't changed much, have you? Always questioning, always challenging. Those qualities served you well as a shinobi. They'll serve you even better as a god." "I don't want to be a god." The words burst from him with unexpected force, causing the marble floor beneath them to crack. Naruto looked down in shock as golden light seeped through the fissures. "Careful," Palutena cautioned, though she didn't step back. Divine energy responds to emotion much more directly than chakra. You'll need to learn control. Naruto took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. This was too much, too fast. I just want to go home, he said quietly. My family needs me. They mourned you properly, Palutena said gently. A hero's funeral. The entire village gathered. Even the 5 Kage came to pay their respects. The image of his children weeping at his funeral made Naruto's chest tighten painfully. Can I see them? Just once. Eventually. Perhaps. But not yet. Palutena's staff glowed briefly as she tapped it against the floor, repairing the cracks Naruto had created. New gods cannot safely interact with the mortal realm until they've learned to control their abilities. You would cause more harm than good. Naruto clenched his fists, frustration building. Then what am I supposed to do? Sit around in this wherever we are and just accept that I'm suddenly a god. The divine nexus, Palutena corrected patiently. And no, you'll be doing quite a bit more than sitting around. You'll be learning, training, and eventually finding your place among the pantheons. Pantheons. Plural, of course. Palutena smiled, sweeping her staff in an arc. The space around them shimmered. And suddenly they were standing on what appeared to be a massive translucent platform high above an impossible landscape. Below them stretched a sprawling Celeste. IAL city that defied physics. Waterfalls flowed upward, buildings floated unsupported, and gardens bloomed with plants that shimmered with metallic light. The divine nexus connects all divine realms, Palutena explained. Gods from countless realities maintain presence here. Some come from worlds similar to yours, others from realms so different you can hardly imagine them. Naruto's eyes widened as he took in the view. In the distance, he could see massive structures that looked like temples, palaces, and monuments, each with distinct architectural styles. Some appeared to be made of pure light, others of stone or crystal or materials he couldn't begin to identify. That's the celestial spire, Palutena said, pointing to a towering structure that seemed to pierce the very heavens. Home to the angelic hierarchy. And there, she gestured toward a sprawling complex surrounded by gardens of flame, is Olympus. The Greek pantheon resides there. And where do I belong? Naruto asked, he concept feeling strange on his tongue. That's yet to be determined. New gods typically align with pantheons that match their domains and nature. But first, we need to understand what kind of god you've become. Before Naruto could ask what she meant, the platform beneath them dissolved, and they were standing in what looked like a training ground. The space was enclosed by high walls of white stone, with various obstacles and targets scattered throughout. It reminded Naruto vaguely of the Chunin exam arenas, though far more elegant. This is the proving ground, Palutena explained. A safe place for divine beings to test their abilities without causing widespread destruction. You think I'm going to cause destruction? Naruto asked, raising an eyebrow. I think you have no idea what you're capable of. She replied evenly. None of us do. That's what we're here to find out. Naruto rolled his shoulders, feeling oddly restless. Fine. So what do I do? Punch something. Palutena chuckled. Let's start with something simpler. Try to feel your divine energy. It's similar to chakra in some ways, but far less constrained. Closing his eyes, Naruto tried to sense the energy within him as he had thousands of times before. What he found was both familiar and utterly foreign. His chakra pathways were gone, replaced by something more like a vast internal ocean of golden light that seemed to have no boundaries or limitations. When he tried to draw on it as he would chakra, the energy surged forward eagerly, too eagerly. Whoa! His eyes snapped open as golden light began pouring from his skin, forming a blinding aura around his body. The ground beneath his feet cracked again, and the air seemed to warp. Careful, Palutena warned, quickly raising her staff. A barrier of green light formed around Naruto, containing the outpouring of energy. You're trying to channel it like chakra, but divine energy doesn't work that way. Don't force it through pathways that no longer exist. Then how am I supposed to control it? Naruto demanded, struggling to rein in the power that threatened to overwhelm him. Intent, Palutena said, will. Divine energy responds directly to your thoughts and desires. Don't try to shape it with hand signs or techniques, simply imagine what you want to happen. Naruto frowned in concentration. Instead of trying to mold the energy, he pictured it settling back inside him. Calm and controlled, Slowly, the golden aura receded, drawing back into his body until only a faint glow remained beneath his skin. Good, Palutena nodded approvingly. Now, try something simple. Create a sphere of energy in your hand. Naruto raised his palm, thinking of the Rasengan. He imagined divine energy gathering above his hand, forming a perfect sphere. To his surprise, it happened almost instantly. A golden orb materialized, spinning with internal light. It's like a Rasengan, he said, studying the sphere with fascination. But I didn't need to form it with chakra rotation. Your divine abilities will often echo your mortal techniques, Palutena explained. They're shaped by your experiences and nature. Try making it larger. Naruto concentrated, and the sphere expanded until it was the size of a beach ball. Unlike a Rasengan, which grew more unstable as it increased in size, the divine orb maintained perfect cohesion. Now try giving it a purpose, Palutena suggested. Intent matters with divine energy. What do you want it to do? Naruto thought for a moment, then imagined the sphere becoming a source of healing energy, like the medical ninjutsu Sakura had used countless times. The golden orb's color shifted, taking on a warm amber hue. He could sense its properties changing, becoming something that could mend and restore. Interesting, Palutena murmured, studying the sphere. Healing isn't a common domain for new gods. Is that what this is about? Finding my domain. Precisely. Every god has domains, aspects of existence they have particular influence over. Some govern natural elements like fire or water. Others rule concepts like love, war, or wisdom. Naruto let the healing sphere dissipate. And you think I'll have healing as a domain? It's one possibility, Palutena said, but I suspect your domains will be more complex, given your unique background. Let's try something else. Attempt to create a clone of yourself. The request brought a smile to Naruto's face. If there was one technique he knew better than any other, it was the shadow clone jutsu. Without thinking, his hands formed the familiar cross sign, but before he could channel energy, Palutena gently tapped his hands with her staff. No hand signs, she reminded him. Just intent. Right. Naruto lowered his hands, feeling oddly naked without the familiar gesture. Instead, he simply imagined duplicates of himself appearing beside him. The result was immediate and surprising. Instead of the puff of smoke that normally accompanied his shadow clones, golden light gathered and shaped itself into not one, but 10 perfect copies of Naruto. They were identical to him in every detail, except they glowed more brightly, as if made of condensed light. Wow, one of the clones said, examining his hands. We're different from shadow clones. We feel more permanent, another observed. Palutena circled the group, her expression thoughtful. Creation and multiplication, possibly domains related to abundance or replication. Try dispelling them. Naruto focused, and the clones dissolved back into motes of golden light that were reabsorbed into his body. Unlike shadow clones, he didn't receive a rush of memories or experiences, they had truly been separate entities. That was strange, he admitted. They didn't feel connected to me the way shadow clones do. Because you created true duplicates, not mere chakra constructs, Palutena explained. With practice, you could likely create beings with independent existence. The idea was both fascinating and disturbing. So I could just make people, not people as such, but divine servants, yes. Palutena gestured to a far corner of the training ground. Let's try something different. Attempt to teleport to that marker. Naruto looked where she was pointing and saw a glowing symbol on the ground about 50 yards away. Teleport. I never learned the Flying Thunder God technique. This isn't ninjutsu, Palutena reminded him patiently. Simply will yourself to be there. Focusing on the marker, Naruto imagined himself standing on it. Nothing happened. He tried again, concentrating harder, but remained firmly in place. Interesting, Palutena said, not seeming disappointed. Spatial manipulation doesn't appear to be an affinity for you. That's useful information. What does it mean? Every god has strengths and limitations. We're building a picture of yours. She tapped her staff against the ground, and several targets appeared around the training area. Try attacking those targets from here. Naruto extended his hand toward the nearest target, willing energy to strike it. A beam of golden light shot from his palm, but instead of destroying the target, it enveloped it in a protective barrier. I was trying to destroy it, he said, confused. But your instinct was to protect, Palutena observed. Try again, with the specific intent to destroy. Naruto focused on a different target, picturing it shattering under his attack. This time, a more concentrated beam erupted from his hand, obliterating the target completely. The backlash of power was surprising, knocking him back several steps. Destruction is possible for you, but doesn't come as naturally as protection, Palutena noted. That suggests something about your divine nature. As they continued testing his abilities, a pattern emerged. Naruto excelled at abilities related to protection, endurance, and perseverance. He could create powerful barriers, enhance the strength of objects or beings, and create duplicates of himself. His offensive capabilities were strong but required more concentration, except when framed as protecting something else. I think I'm starting to understand, Palutena said after an hour of experiments. Your divine domains appear to center around protection, determination, and perhaps restoration. You embody the will to endure and the strength to safeguard others. Naruto wiped sweat from his brow, surprised to find that despite being a god, he could still feel tired. That actually makes sense. All I ever wanted was to protect my precious people, and that desire has shaped your divine essence. Palutena smiled. You're the god of. Before she could finish, a shimmering distortion appeared in the air beside them. From it stepped a tall figure with copper-colored skin and mismatched eyes, one gold, one silver. He wore flowing robes of shifting patterns that seemed to change color with each movement. His smile was wide and sharp. Well, the newcomer drawled. So this is our newest divine colleague. How fascinating. Palutena's expression cooled noticeably. Lord Loki, this is a private assessment session. Is it? How terribly rude of me to intrude. The god, Loki, apparently, didn't sound remotely apologetic. His mismatched eyes fixed on Naruto with undisguised curiosity. But I simply had to see the mortal-turned god everyone's been whispering about. They say you absorbed the power of 9 divine beasts before your ascension. Quite the ambitious start. They weren't divine, Naruto corrected, instantly wary of this newcomer. Something about him reminded Naruto of Orochimaru, too smooth, too calculating. They were tailed beasts, chakra constructs, semantics. Loki waved a dismissive hand. The point is, you've arrived with quite the reputation already. Some are even saying you might be the one mentioned in the old prophecies. Palutena shot Loki a warning glance. Those prophecies are not to be discussed casually, particularly with new arrivals. Prophecies? Naruto asked. What prophecies? Nothing to concern yourself with now, Palutena said firmly. Lord Loki was just leaving. Actually, Loki said, his smile growing wider, I thought I might offer a more practical test of our new colleague's abilities. Theory and controlled experiments are well and good, but nothing reveals a god's true nature like a challenge. Naruto recognized the tone immediately, the same one used by countless opponents who'd tried to goad him into fights over the years. I'm still learning how this works, he said carefully. Maybe another time. Afraid? Loki asked, raising an eyebrow. How disappointing. I expected more from the legendary Naruto Uzumaki, hero of the 4th Great Ninja War. I'm not falling for that, Naruto said flatly. I outgrew pointless rivalries a long time ago. For a moment, Loki looked surprised, then he laughed, a genuine sound of delight. Oh, I like you. Most new gods are so eager to prove themselves they leap at any challenge. You have restraint. That's rare. Lord Loki, Palutena said, an edge in her voice. Naruto's training schedule is carefully planned. Unscheduled confrontations are not part of it. Training schedules, Loki scoffed. So tedious, so limiting. He circled Naruto, studying him from all angles. You don't strike me as someone who learned by following careful schedules, Naruto Uzumaki. You learned by doing, by facing challenges head-on. Am I wrong? Despite himself, Naruto felt a smile tugging at his lips. You're not wrong. Then humor me with one small challenge. Loki stopped in front of him, spreading his hands. A simple test. No combat, no danger, just a measure of your divine intuition. Palutena sighed, recognizing defeat. Very well. One test, then you will. Leave us to continue the official assessment. Of course. Loki snapped his fingers, and 3 identical golden apples appeared, floating in the air before Naruto. These apples appear identical, but they are not. One brings knowledge, one brings strength, and one brings doom. Choose wisely. Naruto studied the floating apples skeptically. And how exactly am I supposed to tell them apart? That's the test, Loki said smugly. Use your divine senses. All gods can perceive the true nature of objects if they try. Naruto glanced at Palutena, who nodded reluctantly. He's not lying about that ability. Though this is hardly the ideal way to learn it. With a shrug, Naruto focused on the apples. At first, they all looked identical, perfect spheres of polished gold. But as he concentrated, trying to sense beyond the physical, he began to notice subtle differences. The left apple seemed to pulse with a rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat, strong and vital. The middle one glowed with an inner light that felt warm and illuminating. The right one had something wrong about it, a dissonant energy that set his teeth on edge. Acting on instinct, Naruto reached out and took the middle apple. This one. Loki's mismatched eyes widened slightly. Interesting choice. Most choose strength. Let's see if you chose correctly. The apple in Naruto's hand dissolved into golden light that flowed into him. Immediately, his mind filled with understanding, not specific knowledge, but a heightened perception of the divine energies around him. He could suddenly sense the complex ebb of power that connected everything in the divine nexus, could feel the distinct signatures of Palutena and Loki, could even glimpse the distant pulses of other divine beings throughout the realm. The apple of knowledge, Loki confirmed, looking genuinely impressed. How did you know? It felt right, Naruto said simply. The left one was power, wasn't it? And the right was the trap. Very good. Loki clapped his hands together. Most new gods either can't tell the difference at all, or they instinctively reach for strength. You chose wisdom. Most unusual. I've had enough power to last several lifetimes, Naruto said quietly. What I've always needed more of is understanding. Loki studied him with new interest. Perhaps the prophecies aren't as far-fetched as I thought. He bowed with a flourish. I'll leave you to your scheduled activities, Naruto Uzumaki. But we will meet again soon, I think. With that, he stepped backward into another shimmering distortion and vanished. What was that about? Naruto asked once they were alone. And what prophecies was he talking about? Palutena sighed, looking troubled. Loki is the Norse god of mischief. He delights in testing and challenging other gods, especially newcomers. As for the prophecies, there are ancient predictions about a god who would rise from mortal origins and change the divine order. Nothing you need to concern yourself with yet. You keep saying, yet, Naruto observed. When will I need to concern myself with these things? When you're ready. Palutena's tone made it clear the subject was closed. For now, let's continue your assessment. Your encounter with Loki actually revealed something important. You have a natural affinity for divine perception. They spent the next several hours testing more of Naruto's abilities. He learned to create constructs of divine energy, to enhance his physical abilities with divine power, and to sense the energies of other beings. Throughout it all, Palutena remained patient, explaining the differences between his old chakra techniques and his new divine abilities. As the session wound down, Naruto found himself sitting on a bench at the edge of the training ground, watching the strange celestial sky above them shift from blue to purple as some equivalent of evening approached. I still can't believe this is real, he admitted. That I'm a god now. Palutena sat beside him, her staff resting across her lap. It will take time to adjust. All new gods struggle with the transition. Where will I stay? Do gods sleep? We don't require sleep as mortals do. But many find it restful to maintain the habit, Palutena explained. As for accommodations, new gods typically reside in the transitional halls until they determine their pantheon alignment. Naruto frowned. That sounds impersonal. It is, Palutena admitted. But necessary. Divine politics can be complex, and rushing to align yourself with a particular pantheon before understanding the implications could create problems. Naruto was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he asked, can I create something here? Like a place of my own? Palutena considered this. Theoretically, yes. Go. DS with creation aspects to their domains can shape small portions of the nexus to their will. But it requires significant control, which most new gods lack. Let me try, Naruto said, standing up. Quote, I want to create something that reminds me of home. Very well. Palutena rose as well, gesturing to an empty section of the training ground. Focus there. Imagine what you wish to create, and will it into being. But start small. Perhaps a simple structure. Naruto closed his eyes, picturing Konoha as he had known it. The Hokage Tower, the academy, the streets and shops, his old apartment, Ichiraku Ramen, his family's home, all the places that had defined his life. As he concentrated, divine energy flowed from him in waves, far more than he intended. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Naruto, Palutena cautioned, you're channeling too much power. Focus on one building, not an entire village. But Naruto's emotions had taken control of his divine energy. Memories of Konoha, of home, RGED through him. His childhood loneliness, his struggles at the academy, his growth as a shinobi, his achievements as Hokage, his life with his family. All of it poured out with his divine power, ping and molding the energy into physical form. When he finally opened his eyes, he gasped. Before them stood a perfect miniature replica of Konoha. Every building, every street, every detail reproduced in gleaming materials that seemed to be composed of solidified light. It was about the size of a large garden, with the Hokage monument no taller than Naruto himself, but it was unmistakably Konoha. I didn't mean to make all of that, Naruto said, staring in amazement at what he'd created. Palutena circled the miniature village, her expression a mix of concern and fascination. This is extraordinary for a new god. The level of detail, the stability of the creation. She looked at Naruto with new respect. Your domain connection to creation must be stronger than I initially assessed. Naruto walked through his miniature Konoha, marveling at the perfect recreation. Everything was exactly as he remembered it, down to the tiniest details, the swing outside the academy, the cracks in the pavement near his old apartment. Even the precise arrangement of tools in the small garden behind his family home. It feels real, he said, touching a tiny tree. Despite its size, the bark had texture. The leaves rustled in a phantom breeze. Because you poured your memories and emotions into it, Palutena explained. This isn't just a model, it's a physical manifestation of your connection to your mortal life. As Naruto explored further, he noticed something strange. At the center of the village, where the Hokage Tower should have been, stood a structure he didn't recognize, a circular temple. With pillars of amber light and a domed roof that seemed to be made of solidified fire. It was beautiful but completely foreign to Konoha's architecture. I didn't create that, he said, pointing to the temple. Palutena examined it with interest. No, you didn't, at least, not consciously. This appears to be a manifestation of your divine essence taking physical form. A god's true temple often appears in their early creations, even when they don't intend it. What does it mean? It means we've found more clarity about your divine nature. Palutena gestured to the miniature temple. This is a temple of enduring will. Your primary domains are determination and protection, with secondary domains in restoration and creation. Naruto stared at the temple, feeling a strange resonance with it despite never having seen it before. God of determination and protection, he repeated quietly. The title felt right somehow, fitting the person he had always tried to be. It's an unusual combination, Palutena noted. Most protective deities are more passive, focused on shields and barriers. Your protection is active, driven by will and determination. You don't just ward off harm, you actively oppose it, fight against it. That sounds about right, Naruto said with a slight smile. I never was good at sitting back and letting things happen. A sudden wave of exhaustion hit him, making him sway slightly. Creating the miniature village had drained more of his energy than he'd realized. You need rest, Palutena said, steadying him with a hand on his shoulder. New gods often experience fatigue after large expenditures of divine power. Your reserves are vast, but your control is still developing. I thought gods didn't need sleep. We don't need it physically, but mentally and spiritually. Rest is still beneficial, especially for those newly ascended. She guided him to the edge of his creation. I'll show you to temporary quarters where you can recover. As they prepared to leave, Naruto looked back at his miniature Konoha. Will this stay here? Yes, unless you unmake it. Palutena gave him an encouraging smile. Consider it your first divine work, a piece of your mortal home brought into your immortal existence. Naruto nodded, feeling both pride in what he'd created and a deep ache for what he'd lost. As a new god, he had eternity ahead of him, but his mortal life, his family, his friends, would continue without him. Somehow, he needed to find a way to reconcile those two realities. As they walked away, he didn't notice the tiny golden fox that appeared at the edge of the miniature village, watching them with curious eyes before vanishing into the replica of the forest surrounding Konoha. In the distance, unseen by either of them, a slender figure in a simple WHITE dress observed from the shadows of a nearby column. Her blue eyes followed Naruto with interest, noting the remarkable creation he'd managed on his first day. The small goddess turned away, her dark hair bouncing against her shoulders as she hurried back to her own sanctuary, eager to report what she'd witnessed. The divine nexus had a new god, and Hestia, goddess of the hearth, had a feeling that things were about to get very interesting indeed. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Hearth and home. Naruto stood at the edge of the divine conclave, a massive amphitheater carved from what appeared to be a single enormous crystal. The space thrummed with energy as hundreds of divine beings conversed, argued, and negotiated. The assembly represented dozens of pantheons from across the multiverse, gathered for what Palutena had described as a routine convergence. There was nothing routine about it from where Naruto stood. Gods of every imaginable description filled the tiered seating, beings of pure light, deities with multiple arms or animal features, elegant figures in flowing robes, and armored war gods with weapons that radiated deadly power. The air itself seemed alive with divine presence, making it difficult to breathe despite his own godhood. "They're staring at me," Naruto muttered to Palutena, who stood beside him in formal attire, her usual white robes replaced with more elaborate ceremonial garb. "You're new," she replied simply, "and your origin is unconventional. Curiosity is natural. Curiosity doesn't usually feel this hostile." Palutena smiled slightly. "Divine beings can be territorial. A new god represents unknown potential, perhaps a threat, perhaps an ally. They're assessing you." "Great." Naruto tugged at the formal robes he'd been provided for the Aka. Scion, white with orange and gold accents that reflected his divine domains. The outfit was far more elaborate than anything he'd worn as Hokage. "So I just stand here like an exhibit while they decide if I'm worth talking to?" "For now, yes," Palutena said. "This is merely an introduction. Formal recognition comes later, after you've established yourself." A tall figure approached them, his golden armor gleaming in the ambient light. His perfectly sculpted features might have been carved from marble, and a crown of laurels rested on his golden hair. The sheer arrogance in his bearing reminded Naruto uncomfortably of the Otsutsuki clan. "So this is our newest divine colleague," the god said, his voice melodious yet somehow grating. "Not quite what I expected from the reports." Palutena inclined her head. "Lord Apollo, may I present Naruto Uzumaki, god of determination and protection." Apollo circled Naruto slowly, evaluating him with cool blue eyes. "Mortal born, were you not? From one of the shinobi realms?" "Yes," Naruto answered, meeting the god's gaze steadily. "I was Hokage of Konohagakure." "Hokage," Apollo repeated, as if tasting the word. "A mortal title of some significance, I gather. How quaint that you still identify with it." Naruto felt his temper flare, but kept it in check. "It's who I was. It's part of who I am." "Was," Apollo emphasized. "You would do well to remember that your mortal life is behind you. Gods who cling to their previous existence rarely adapt well to divine reality." "I'll keep that in mind," Naruto said neutrally, though his clenched jaw suggested otherwise. Apollo seemed to lose interest. "The Pantheon Leadership Council will want to evaluate you properly at some point. Until then," he made a dismissive gesture and walked away without completing his thought. "Friendly guy," Naruto remarked dryly. "Apollo is traditional," Palutena said diplomatically. "Many of the older gods share his perspective on mortal-born deities." "Which is, that you're lesser, unworthy." Her expression softened at Naruto's frown. "I don't share that view, obviously. But you should be prepared for it." As they moved further into the conclave, Naruto experienced variations on the same theme. Some gods ignored him completely. Others regarded him with barely concealed disdain. A few, mostly younger deities, showed genuine interest but were often led away by their more established colleagues. After an hour of this treatment, Naruto's patience was wearing thin. "This is pointless," he whispered to Palutena as they stood near a refreshment area, where gods sipped from goblets filled with liquids that changed color with each taste. "No one's actually interested in getting to know me. They just want to confirm their preconceptions." "Divine politics moves slowly," Palutena cautioned. "Patience is, if you say, a virtue, I might actually lose it," Naruto interrupted with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I spent my entire mortal life fighting for recognition and acceptance. I'm not starting over from scratch for eternity." Before Palutena could respond, a commotion erupted across the conclave. A group of warrior gods had engaged in what appeared to be a friendly contest of strength, but judging by the shattered crystal pillars and growing crowd, it was escalating beyond friendly. "They're going to bring down the whole structure," a soft voice said beside Naruto. He turned to find a petite goddess with dark hair tied in twintails standing next to him. Her simple white dress was in stark contrast to the elaborate attire of most gods present, and her blue eyes held a warmth that was similarly distinct from the cold evaluation he'd faced all day. "Shouldn't someone stop them?" Naruto asked, watching as one god hurled another through a decorative fountain, sending iridescent water spraying across alarmed onlookers. The small goddess sighed. "The enforcers are probably on their way, but they tend to be slow to respond to routine disputes." She made air quotes around the phrase, her nose wrinkling in disapproval. Naruto watched as the destruction spread, divine powers flaring dangerously. Without thinking, he stepped forward. "Naruto," Palutena cautioned, "this isn't your concern. Someone could get hurt," he said simply, and continued toward the escalating fight. The warrior gods, 4 of them now, were fully engaged in their contest, each trying to outdo the others with increasingly destructive displays of power. They appeared oblivious to the damage they were causing or the alarm of the other attendees. Naruto approached the edge of their impromptu arena, assessing the situation. One god with crimson armor was preparing a massive energy attack that would definitely breach the conclave's walls if released. "Hey," Naruto called out, his voice carrying unexpected authority. "That's enough." The warriors paused, turning toward him with expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance. "Who are you to command us, newcomer?" the crimson-armored god demanded, his attack still gathering power. "Someone who thinks a diplomatic gathering isn't the place for a battle that's about to collapse the building," Naruto replied evenly. The god sneered. "Your opinion matters little. This is a matter of honor between warriors." "Then take it somewhere else," Naruto suggested, his posture relaxed but ready. Quote, "Unless you're worried you can't win without destroying half the conclave as a distraction." The jab hit its mark. The crimson god's expression darkened. "You dare question my honor?" "I'm questioning your judgment," Naruto corrected. "There's nothing honorable about endangering others for your ego." The god snarled and redirected his attack toward Naruto. The crimson energy blast shot forward with devastating speed, causing nearby attendees to scatter in panic. Naruto didn't move. Instead, he raised one hand, focusing his divine energy. A barrier of golden light formed before him, absorbing the attack completely. The conclave fell silent, all eyes on the confrontation. "I said, that's enough," Naruto repeated, his voice quiet but carrying throughout the now silent chamber. The barrier before him dissolved, the energy dissipating harmlessly. For a tense moment, the crimson god seemed ready to launch another attack. Then a slow clap broke the silence. "Well handled," came a resonant voice. A tall, distinguished figure with dark skin and eyes like distant stars approached from the upper tiers. His simple gray robes belied the immense power that radiated from him, though perhaps a touch dramatic for a first appearance. The warrior gods immediately bowed their heads. "Lord Kronos," the crimson god said, his arrogance evaporating. "We were merely making a spectacle," Kronos finished for him. "One that our newest colleague has efficiently ended." He turned to Naruto, studying him with ancient eyes. "Naruto Uzumaki, isn't it? The determination in your domain is evident." Not many new gods would intervene in a dispute between established war deities. Someone had to Naruto said with a shrug. Indeed. Chronos gestured to the warriors. Perhaps you four might repair the damage you've caused before departing. It wasn't a suggestion. The chastened god set about restoring the broken pillars and fountains while Chronos guided Naruto back toward Palutena. An interesting first impression, Chronos commented. You've certainly drawn attention to yourself. I wasn't trying to, Naruto admitted. The best impressions rarely are. The ancient god nodded to Palutena. You've found an unusual one this time. He found himself, if we're being accurate, Palutena replied with a small smile. Chronos chuckled. Indeed. Well, Naruto Uzumaki, I suspect we'll speak again when things are less theatrical. Until then. With a slight bow, he moved away, immediately surrounded by other senior deities eager for his attention. You just diffused a situation that could have escalated into a major diplomatic incident, Palutena said, sounding impressed. And caught the attention of one of the elder gods in the process. Is that good or bad? Both, potentially. Palutena's expression was thoughtful. Attention brings opportunity, but also scrutiny. The small goddess in the white dress had followed Naruto back from the confrontation. That was brave, she said with a warm smile. And a bit reckless. I've been called worse combinations, Naruto replied, returning her smile. This is Hestia, Palutena introduced them. Goddess of the hearth and home. From the Greek pantheon, Hestia added. Extending a delicate hand, though I maintain some independence from Olympian politics. When Naruto took her hand, he felt an immediate sense of warmth and comfort, like coming in from a cold day to a blazing hearth. It was the first truly welcoming presence he'd encountered since arriving in the divine nexus. It's nice to meet a god who doesn't look at me like I'm some kind of divine anomaly, he said. Hestia laughed, the sound musical and genuine. Oh, you are an anomaly, but that's what makes you interesting. The old gods forget that change and novelty are essential to existence. She looked around conspiratorially, then lowered her voice. Between us, most of them have grown dreadfully boring over the millennia. Despite himself, Naruto laughed. There was something refreshingly unpretentious about Hestia that put him at ease. Lady Hestia oversees one of the eternal flames, Palutena explained. Her sanctuary is one of the most respected neutral grounds in the divine nexus. It's just a fancy way of saying I keep the home fires burning, Hestia said with a modest shrug. Less glamorous than battle or wisdom, but essential in its way. Home is worth protecting, Naruto said quietly. It might be the most important thing there is. Something in his tone made Hestia study him more closely. You understand that better than most gods, I think. Even those who weren't mortal born. She tilted her head slightly. You've created your own space already, haven't you? I heard whispers about a miniature village appearing in the training grounds. Word travels fast, Naruto said. Surprised. The divine nexus thrives on gossip, Hestia admitted with a grin. Eternity gets dull without it. Your little creation has caused quite a stir. Most new gods can barely manifest a decent chair. Let alone an entire village. It just happened, Naruto explained. I was thinking of home, and your divine power responded to your heart's desire. Hestia nodded as if this made perfect sense. That's how the strongest divine works are created, not through technique or practice, but through genuine connection to what matters most. The conversation was interrupted as a small delegation of formal-looking gods approached, their expressions solemn. The Divine Credentials Committee requires your presence, Lady Palutena, the lead god announced. Regarding your sponsorship of the new entity. Palutena frowned slightly. This is highly irregular. Credential reviews are scheduled well in advance. These are irregular circumstances, the god replied stiffly. His gaze flickering briefly to Naruto. It's about me, isn't it? Naruto asked directly. The god didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. Go ahead, Naruto told Palutena. I'll be fine. She hesitated. The conclave can be overwhelming for newcomers. Perhaps you should return to the transitional halls until I'll look after him, Hestia offered. My sanctuary isn't far, and new gods are always welcome there. Palutena seemed relieved. Thank you, Lady Hestia. Naruto, I'll find you once this matter is resolved. She gave him a reassuring smile before following the delegation toward a side chamber. So, Hestia said brightly once they were alone, would you like to see a proper divine sanctuary? One that doesn't involve pompous speeches and political posturing. Naruto glanced around at the conclave, where many gods were still watching him with suspicious or calculating expressions. Lead the way. Hestia guided him through the crystalline pathways of the divine nexus, away from the formal structures of the conclave and toward what appeared to be a more residential district. As they walked, the architecture gradually shifted from imposing grandeur to more intimate, welcoming designs. The nexus reflects the nature of the gods who inhabit each area, Hestia explained as they passed gardens of impossible flowers and fountains that flowed with light rather than water. The grand temples and halls belong to gods of power and authority. My domain is cozier. They rounded a corner, and Naruto stopped in his tracks. Before them stood what appeared to be a modest temple of warm brown stone and polished wood. It wasn't particularly large or imposing compared to the other divine structures he'd seen, but it radiated a sense of welcome that was almost tangible. The steps leading to its entrance were worn smooth, suggesting countless visitors over the ages. It's not much compared to Olympus or the Celestial Spire, Hestia said with a touch of self-consciousness. But it's home. It's perfect, Naruto said honestly, feeling drawn to the simple beauty of the sanctuary. It reminds me of something from your mortal life, Hestia guessed. That's the nature of the hearth. It connects to everyone's idea of home, across all realms and realities. As they approached, Naruto noticed that the air grew warmer, but not uncomfortably so. It was the warmth of a perfect summer evening or a well-heated room in winter. The kind of warmth that invited you to stay. The interior was even more welcoming than the exterior. The central chamber was arranged around a circular hearth where flames of gold and amber danced merrily, casting their light on comfortable furnishings and shelves lined with objects from countless cultures and worlds. The ceiling was open to the sky, though somehow no wind disturbed the flames below. The eternal flame, Hestia said, gesturing to the hearth. One of the original divine fires. It's never gone out, not once. Since the formation of the divine nexus. Naruto approached the hearth cautiously, feeling its power. Unlike the raw energy he'd sensed from other divine sources, this power was gentle, nurturing. It didn't demand or threaten, it invited and sustained. It feels alive, he observed. All truly divine things are, in their way, Hestia replied, kneeling gracefully beside the hearth. She stirred the flames with her bare hand, the fire parting around her fingers like water. The flame responds to intent and emotion. Watch. She cupped her hands, and a portion of the fire flowed into her palms, forming a small sphere of golden light. As she concentrated, the sphere transformed, taking the shape of a tiny bird that fluttered around the room before returning to the hearth. Beautiful, Naruto said, genuinely impressed. A simple trick, Hestia said modestly. The flame is capable of far more in the right hands. She looked up at him. Would you like to try? Me, I don't know anything about hearth magic. It's not about knowledge, it's about connection. She patted the floor beside her. Sit, feel the flame, let it know you. Feeling slightly foolish but curious, Naruto sat cross-legged beside the hearth. The warmth washed over him immediately, comforting and inviting. Now, place your hand near the flame, not in it, just close enough to feel its heat, Hestia instructed. Naruto extended his hand, palm facing the dancing fire. The heat intensified, but remained pleasant. Close your eyes, Hestia continued. Think of home, not just a place, but the feeling of home. What it means to you. Naruto closed his eyes, letting memories wash over him. Iruka treating him to ramen at Ichiraku's. His apartment, small and messy but his own. The village accepting him after the pain attack. The Hokage office where he'd worked to protect everyone. His home with Hinata and the children. The warmth against his palm increased, and he heard Hestia gasp softly. Open your eyes, she whispered. Naruto looked down to find a portion of the flame had extended toward his hand, forming a perfect miniature replica of his family home in Konoha. The tiny structure burned steadily in the air before his palm, every detail rendered in flickering fire. I didn't tell it to do that, he said, amazed. You didn't have to. The flame responds to the heart's true image of home. Hestia studied the fiery structure with fascination. This is remarkable for a first attempt. Most gods require multiple tries before the flame shows them anything coherent. As they watched, the miniature house dissolved back into the hearth. The flames resuming their natural dance. The eternal flame has recognized you, Hestia said with a hint of awe in her voice. That's uncommon for new gods, especially those not associated with hearth domains. What does it mean? It means you have a strong connection to the concept of home and sanctuary. Your domain of protection aligns well with the hearth's nature. She smiled warmly. It also means you're welcome here anytime. The flame doesn't extend such invitations lightly. For the first time since awakening in the divine nexus, Naruto felt a genuine sense of belonging. This sanctuary, with its simple warmth and welcoming atmosphere, resonated with something deep inside him, the part that had always sought connection and community. Thank you, he said. The words inadequate for the feeling of acceptance her sanctuary provided. This place it's special. Just doing my job, Hestia said with a wink. The hearth welcomes all who truly need it. She rose gracefully. Now, are you hungry? Gods don't require food, strictly speaking, but many of us enjoy it. I make excellent ambrosia cookies. I haven't eaten since. Naruto tried to remember, then realized, since before I died. I guess. Then you're long overdue. Hestia led him to a cozy kitchen area adjacent to the main chamber. Unlike the grand banquet halls he'd glimpsed elsewhere in the divine nexus. This was a working kitchen with well-used utensils and the lingering aromas of countless meals. As she gathered ingredients, moving with practiced ease, Naruto found himself relaxing further. The familiar domesticity of watching someone prepare food was soothing in its ordinariness. So, Hestia said as she mixed a batter that shimmered with tiny motes of light, tell me about yourself, Naruto Uzumaki. Not the god part. I'm more interested in the person you were. The one who shaped the god you're becoming. And so Naruto talked. He told her about growing up alone in Konoha, about the demon fox sealed inside him. About his dream of becoming Hokage. He spoke of Team 7, of Sasuke's betrayal and redemption, of the Fourth Great Ninja War. He described becoming Hokage, building a family, and his final sacrifice to save the village from an otherworldly threat. Hestia listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. By the time she served the cookies, which tasted like every good thing Naruto had ever eaten somehow combined into one perfect flavor, they were conversing like old friends. Your life was extraordinary, she said, sipping from a cup of nectar. Even by divine standards, it had its moments, Naruto admitted with a smile. But toward the end, the best parts were the ordinary ones. Family dinners, tucking the kids in at night, even the paperwork, sometimes. Hestia nodded understanding. That's what most gods never grasp. The profound importance of simple things. They're so focused on grand gestures and cosmic powers that they miss the true foundations of existence. Is that why you seem different from the others? Naruto asked. Less stuck up. Hestia laughed. Partly. I'm one of the oldest Olympians. But I chose a domain that keeps me connected to mortal concerns. The hearth is where life happens, the small moments, the daily rituals. It grounds me. It must be lonely sometimes, though, Naruto observed. Being different. Something flickered in Hestia's eyes, a momentary shadow quickly hidden behind her smile. Sometimes. But the hearth is never truly lonely. It draws people to it. She gestured to him. See, it brought you here today. Before Naruto could respond, a chime sounded throughout the sanctuary. Hestia frowned, setting down her cup. That's strange, she murmured. The perimeter wards shouldn't be activating. The chime sounded again, more urgent this time. Is something wrong? Naruto asked, instantly alert. Possibly. The sanctuary has protections against unwanted intrusions. They rarely activate since most divine beings respect the neutrality of the hearth. She rose, moving toward the main chamber. I should check. She didn't finish the sentence. A wave of darkness surged through the doorway, extinguishing the ambient lights and plunging the kitchen into shadow. Only the distant glow of the eternal flame provided any illumination. Naruto was on his feet instantly. Divine energy gathering around his hands. What is that? Shadow manifestations, Hestia said, her voice tight. But they shouldn't be able to penetrate the sanctuary's defenses. The darn SS coalesced into vaguely humanoid shapes, their edges constantly shifting and roiling like smoke. Where their faces should have been, there were only vacant hollows from which emanated a cold that cut to the bone. "Get behind me," Naruto ordered, stepping protectively in front of Hestia. To his surprise, she moved beside him instead. "This is my sanctuary," she said firmly. "I don't hide when it's threatened." The shadow creatures advanced silently, gliding across the floor without touching it. There were 5 of them now, surrounding the kitchen doorway. "What do they want?" Naruto asked, tracking their movements. "They don't want anything. They're not truly sentient, more like concentrated negative energy given form." Hestia's hands began to glow with golden light. "They destroy and consume. That's all." As if triggered by her words, the shadows attacked. 2 lunged at Naruto while the others went for Hestia. Moving with the speed and precision honed through decades of combat, Naruto met the attack head-on. He ducked under the first shadow's reach and drove a fist wreathed in golden energy into its center mass. The creature dispersed like smoke, only to reform seconds later. The second shadow caught him with a glancing blow that felt like being drenched in ice water. "They can't be destroyed conventionally," Hestia called, deflecting attacks with shields of hearth fire. "They have to be purified or banished." Naruto adapted quickly. Instead of trying to destroy the shadows, he focused on containing them. He created barriers of divine energy, corralling the creatures away from Hestia and toward the main chamber. "We need to reach the eternal flame," Hestia said, understanding his strategy. "Its light can banish them." They fought their way out of the kitchen, Naruto Pr. Oviding cover as Hestia launched precise attacks with her hearth fire. Unlike most of the gods Naruto had met so far, Hestia fought practically, without grand gestures or dramatic flares of power. Her movements were efficient and purposeful. The main chamber was in chaos. More shadow creatures had invaded, and they seemed to be converging on the central hearth. The eternal flame still burned, but it was notably dimmer. Its light struggling against the encroaching darkness. "They're trying to extinguish the flame," Hestia realized, horror in her voice. "But that's impossible. Nothing can extinguish an eternal flame." "They're going to try anyway," Naruto said grimly, observing how the creatures were systematically attacking the hearth from all sides. Hestia's expression hardened. "Not while I live." She thrust her hands forward, and streams of golden fire shot from her palms, cutting through the shadows like spears of sunlight. Where the fire touched, the creatures shrieked, a sound like whined through a shattered window, and temporarily scattered. Naruto seized the opportunity. Drawing on his divine energy, he created multiple barriers that formed a protective dome around the hearth. Shadows crashed against it like waves against a cliff, each impact sending vibrations through Naruto's body. "It won't hold forever," he warned, feeling the strain of maintaining such a complex structure. "Whatever you're going to do it fast." Hestia nodded and stepped inside his barrier, approaching the dimmed hearth. She knelt beside it, placing both hands directly into the flames. For a moment, nothing happened. Then she began to glow, light pouring from her eyes and mouth as she connected fully with the eternal flame's power. When she spoke, her voice resonated with authority that belied her usually gentle demeanor. "I am Hestia, firstborn of Kronos, goddess of the hearth, guardian of home and sanctuary. By my authority, I command thee, begone." The final word erupted from her with concussive force. The eternal flame flared blindingly bright, sending shockwaves of purifying light throughout the sanctuary. The shadows shrieked as the light touched them, their forms unraveling like thread pulled from a spool. Naruto dropped his barrier, allowing the cleansing light to reach every corner of the sanctuary. Within seconds, the shadow creatures had been completely dispersed, leaving only a lingering chill that quickly faded. Hestia remained kneeling by the hearth, which now burned as brightly as before. She looked exhausted, her usual vibrant presence dimmed much like the flame had been. "Are you okay?" Naruto asked, kneeling beside her. "I will be," she said, her voice slightly hoarse. "That was unexpected. The sanctuary hasn't been attacked directly in millennia." "What were those things, really?" Hestia frowned thoughtfully. "Shadow manifestations are usually random occurrences, negative divine energy that occasionally coalesces into semi-sentient forms. But these," she shook her head, "these were coordinated, purposeful. Someone sent them." "Who would do that? I thought your sanctuary was respected by all the pantheons." It is. Or it should be. Hestia's expression was troubled. Violating the neutrality of a hearth sanctuary is one of the gravest transgressions in divine law. Naruto looked around at the chamber, which was now returning to its welcoming state as the eternal flame's light restored it. Could it have been meant as a message? Or a warning? Possibly. Hestia stood, brushing ash from her white dress. Though I can't imagine what I've done to warrant such a thing. My domains aren't exactly controversial. A thought occurred to Naruto. What about me? Could someone have been sending a message about welcoming me here? Hestia stared at him, her eyes widening slightly. That's disturbingly plausible. There was that confrontation at the conclave, and then Palutena being summoned by the Credentials Committee. She bit her lip. Your arrival is causing more ripples than I realized. I should go, Naruto said, suddenly uncomfortable with the idea that his presence might be putting Hestia in danger. If I'm the reason your sanctuary was attacked, don't be ridiculous, Hestia cut him off. If someone violated my sanctuary because of you, that's all the more reason for you to stay. I don't respond well to intimidation tactics. But, the eternal flame welcomed you, Naruto, she said firmly. That means you belong here, regardless of what some shadow-sending coward thinks about it. Her determination Nded Naruto of Sakura at her most stubborn. There would be no arguing with her on this point. Fine, he conceded, but at least let me help clean up. He gestured to the minor damage the shadow creatures had caused, overturned furniture, scattered objects, scorch marks on the walls. Hestia smiled. That's easy enough. She turned to the hearth and made a sweeping gesture with her hand. The eternal flame pulsed once, and waves of golden light spread throughout the chamber. Where they passed, order was restored, furniture righted itself, objects returned to their proper places, scorch marks faded away. Handy trick, Naruto commented. Impressed. One of the perks of being a domestic goddess, Hestia said with a hint of pride. Hearth magic is excellent for household maintenance. They settled back in the main chamber, the attack having created a new sense of camaraderie between them. Hestia conjured comfortable cushions near the hearth, and they sat watching the flames dance as they discussed the implications of the attack. If someone is targeting you through me, Hestia reasoned, it suggests they're unwilling to move against you directly. That's actually a good sign. How do you figure that? It means they fear you, or at least respect your potential power enough not to confront you openly. They're testing boundaries, looking for vulnerabilities. Naruto frowned. I've only been a god for a few days. What could they possibly be afraid of? Prophecies, for one thing, Hestia said, then quickly raised a hand to forestall his question. And before you ask, no, I don't know the specifics. Divine prophecies are closely guarded by those who maintain them. But rumors circulate. Loki mentioned something about prophecies too, Naruto recalled. About a mortal-born god changing the divine order. Hestia nodded slowly. That sounds about right. There are always predictions about paradigm shifts and great changes. Most come to nothing, but occasionally. She looked at him speculatively. Occasionally someone comes along who actually fulfills them. I'm not interested in changing any divine order, Naruto protested. I just want to figure out where I fit in all this. That in itself might be the change. Hestia pointed out, a god who doesn't seek power for its own sake. Who values connection and protection above dominance. That's revolutionary thinking in some pantheons. The idea that his basic values could be seen as threatening was both absurd and troubling to Naruto. He'd never considered himself revolutionary. His goals had always been straightforward: protect his precious people. Create peace, be acknowledged. This is giving me a headache, he admitted. Divine politics are even worse than shinobi village relations. Hestia laughed. You have no idea. We've had feuds that have lasted millennia over slights at dinner parties. Their conversation was interrupted by a gentle chiming, different from the alarm that had preceded the shadow attack. Hestia glanced toward the entrance. That would be Palutena, she said. The sanctuary recognizes her. Moments later, Palutena entered the main chamber, her usual serene expression replaced by one of concern. When she saw Naruto and Hestia sitting calmly by the hearth, she visibly relaxed. You're safe, she said. I felt the energy disturbance from the Credentials chamber. Shadow manifestations. Hestia nodded. A coordinated attack. We handled it. Palutena's eyes narrowed. Coordinated. That's concerning. We were just discussing who might have sent them, Naruto said, making room for Palutena to join them near the hearth. And whether it had anything to do with me. Palutena sat gracefully, her staff across her lap. It may well have. The Credentials Committee had some pointed questions about your origin and potential. Like what? Naruto asked. Like whether your unprecedented ascension might destabilize the balance between mortal and divine realms. Whether your former status as a Jinchuriki carries any continuing implications. She hesitated. And whether your domains of determination and protection might influence divine affairs in ways that some find uncomfortable. They're afraid I'll protect mortals too effectively. Naruto asked incredulously. Isn't that supposed to be what gods do? Both goddesses exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Some pantheons view mortals as subjects or playthings. Hestia explained delicately. The idea of a god who genuinely prioritizes mortal well-being for its own sake is seen as eccentric at best, dangerous at worst. That's messed up, Naruto said bluntly. Yes, Palutena agreed with a slight smile. It is, which is precisely why certain factions might view your ascension with alarm. She turned to Hestia. Did he shadow attack cause any permanent damage? No, Hestia assured her. The eternal flame purged them completely. Good. Still, the fact that they breached your sanctuary at all is troubling. The divine conservatives aren't usually so bold. Divine conservatives? Naruto asked. A faction of older gods who resist change in the cosmic order, Palutena explained. They're particularly suspicious of new divine beings who don't follow traditional paths to godhood. Like me. Like you, she confirmed. Though attacking a neutral sanctuary crosses a line that even they rarely breach. It suggests they view you as a significant threat. Or they're trying to isolate him, Hestia suggested. Make other gods wary of associating with him if doing so might make them targets as well. The strategy. Thinking behind the attack bothered Naruto more than the attack itself. This wasn't the straightforward confrontation he was used to as a shinobi. It was subtle, political, designed to manipulate perception rather than achieve direct victory. So what do we do? He asked. I can't exactly challenge them to a fight if I don't even know who they are. We adapt, Palutena said simply. All can't. In you representing your interests in formal channels, while quietly investigating who might be behind the shadow attack. And I'll make it very publicly known that you have the full protection and welcome of my sanctuary, Hestia added. That will send its own message. Naruto looked between them, feeling a surge of gratitude. Within days of becoming a god, he'd somehow found allies willing to stand with him against unknown threats. It reminded him of his early days in Konoha, when Team 7 had become his first real family. Thank you, he said sincerely. Both of you. Don't thank us yet, Palutena cautioned. Divine politics move slowly but inexorably. This is likely just the beginning. Then we'll face whatever comes next together, Naruto said with determination that seemed to make the hearth flames burn brighter in response. Hestia noticed the reaction and smiled. The eternal flame agrees with your sentiment, it seems. Palutena studied the interaction between Naruto and the hearth with interest. The flame responds to him quite strongly. That's unusual for someone not aligned with hearth domains. I was thinking the same thing earlier, Hestia admitted. There's a natural resonance between his divine energy and the flame. An idea began forming in Naruto's mind. If I'm the god of determination and protection, and the hearth represents home and sanctuary, there's overlap there, isn't there? Protection and sanctuary are connected. Very connected, Hestia confirmed. In the most fundamental sense, the hearth's purpose has always been to protect, from cold, from darkness, from hunger. It's the original sanctuary, which might explain why you feel so at home here, Palutena mused. Your domains align with the hearth's essential nature, if not its formal aspects. Naruto looked at the dancing flames thoughtfully. When I created that miniature Konoha in the training grounds, there was a temple at its center that Palutena called a temple of enduring will. What if I could create something similar here? A place that combines my domains with the hearth's protection. Hestia's eyes lit up. A sanctuary within a sanctuary. It's possible. The hearth allows those it welcomes to shape space within its influence. She looked at him curiously. What are you envisioning? Naruto closed his eyes, focusing on the feelings of home and protection that had always driven him. He thought of Konoha, of the Hokage monument overlooking the village, of the forest surrounding it, of the training grounds where he'd spent countless hours. A place that feels like home, he said softly. But not just a replica. Something that blends what was with what is. A space where my old life and new existence can coexist. He opened his eyes and extended his hands toward the eternal flame. To his surprise, tendrils of fire reached out in response, twining around his fingers without burning. The flame recognizes your intent, Hestia whispered, watching in fascination. It's offering its power to help shape your vision. Guided by instinct, Naruto directed the tendrils of fire toward an empty alcove off the main chamber. As the flames touched the space, they began to expand and transform, creating a shimmering curtain of golden light that obscured the alcove from view. Focus on what you want to create, Hestia encouraged him. The flame will translate your intent into reality. Naruto concentrated, refining his vision. He didn't want an exact copy of Konoha that belonged to his past. What he needed was a space that honored that past while embracing his new reality. The curtain of fire pulsed, growing brighter for a moment before parting like a theater curtain. Beyond it, the alcove had transformed completely. It had expanded impossibly, now containing a circular clearing surrounded by trees that resembled Konoha's forests but glowed with subtle divine light. At the center of the clearing stood a replica of the third training ground, complete with 3 wooden posts. But the ground was inlaid with symbols representing protection and determination in divine script. A small version of the Hokage monument was visible in the distance, but instead of the faces of past leaders, it depicted abstract representations of the concept of guardianship. It's perfect, Naruto breathed, feeling a deep connection to the space he'd created. It's remarkable, Palutena said, clearly impressed. The integration of mortal symbolism with divine concepts. I've never seen anything quite like it. Hestia approached the transformed alcove, studying it with wonder. The hearth flame has woven itself throughout the creation. See how it flows through the trees, the ground, even the air. This space exists in harmony with my sanctuary while being uniquely yours. As they stepped into the clearing, Naruto felt a profound sense of rightness. This was a place where he could meditate, train, and gradually reconcile his mortal past with his divine present. It wasn't Konoha, but it carried Konoha's essence, the will of fire that had defined his village and his life. Thank you for allowing this, he said to Hestia. For sharing your sanctuary. The hearth is meant to be shared. She replied with a warm smile. That's its purpose. And this, she gestured to his creation, this enriches my sanctuary. It adds a new dimension of protection and determination. That complements the hearth's nurturing aspect. Palutena walked the perimeter of the clearing, her expression thoughtful. This could serve as more than a personal retreat, Naruto. It could become a formal sanctuary under your divine authority. A place where those who seek protection might find refuge. Is that allowed? Naruto asked. I thought new gods had to wait before establishing official domains. Typically, yes, Palutena acknowledged. But there are precedents for shared sanctuaries under dual divine authority. If Hestia were to formally acknowledge this space as a joint endeavor, I would be happy too. Hestia said without hesitation. The hearth welcomes collaboration. It's strongest when shared. The idea of having an official divine space, even a small one, where he could begin exercising his domains appealed to Naruto deeply. It would give him purpose, a starting point for understanding what it truly meant to be the god of determination and protection. Then let's do it, he decided. What do we need to do to make it official? A simple ritual of recognition, Hestia explained. We combine our divine energies to formally establish the space as a sanctioned divine sanctuary. They stood at the center of the clearing, near the 3 wooden posts that echoed Naruto's first days as a genin. Hestia summoned a small portion of the eternal flame, which hovered between them like a miniature sun. Palutena stepped back, acting as witness to the ritual. Place your hands near the flame, Hestia instructed. Focus your divine energy into it, while thinking of the purpose this sanctuary will serve. Naruto extended his hands, palms facing the floating fire. He concentrated on his domains, determination that never wavered, protection that never failed. He thought of all the people he'd protected in his mortal life, and all those he might protect in his divine one. Golden energy flowed from his hands, merging with the hearth fire. As his power combined with Hestia's, the flame grew, changing from pure gold to a swirling mixture of gold and amber with threads of deep orange, the colors of sunset, of warmth against encroaching darkness. I, Hestia, goddess of the hearth and home, recognize this space as a sanctuary of protection and determination, Hestia intoned formally. May all who seek refuge here find strength and renewal. The words came to Naruto instinctively. I, Naruto Uzumaki, god of determination and protection, establish this sanctuary as a haven for those who endure. May it stand as a beacon against despair and a shelter for the resolute. The combined flame pulsed once, then shot upward, expanding to encompass the entire clearing. For a moment, everything was bathed in golden light. When the light faded, the space had subtly transformed. The symbols in the ground glowed with permanent divine fire, and the trees seemed more solid, more real. The very air felt charged with protective energy. It's done, Hestia said, satisfaction in her voice. The divine nexus now recognizes this as an official sanctuary under our joint authority. The Haven of Enduring Will. Haven of Enduring Will, Naruto repeated, liking the name. It feels right, and not a moment too soon. Palutena commented, looking toward the entrance to Hestia's sanctuary. I suspect word of this will spread quickly. Good, Naruto said firmly. Let the divine conservatives know that I'm not intimidated by shadow attacks or political maneuvering. If they have a problem with me, they can address it directly. Hestia smiled approvingly. That's the spirit. Gods respect strength and conviction, even when they disagree with its application. As they left the newly established haven, returning to the main chamber of Hestia's sanctuary, Naruto felt more grounded than he had since awakening in the divine nexus. He had allies. He had purpose. He had a space that connected his past and present. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but then again, when had his life ever gone according to plan? In the shadows of the divine conclave, a group of figures gathered in a chamber warded against all divine perception. Their features were obscured by veils of power that masked their identities, making them indistinguishable from one another. The shadow attack failed, one stated flatly. The mortal-born god and the hearth goddess repelled them with unexpected ease. It was a test, not an attack. Another countered, and it confirmed our suspicions. His power is substantial, and he forms connections quickly. Already he has Palutena and Hestia as allies. More concerning is the sanctuary they've established, a third figure noted. A formal divine space, recognized by the Nexus itself, after mere days of his existence. It accelerates our timeline considerably. The apparent leader of the group leaned forward, their voice resonant yet somehow hollow. Then we must accelerate our response. The prophecy cannot be allowed to unfold. The mortal-born god must be isolated, contained, and if necessary, unmade before he fully realizes his potential. And if others stand with him, then they share his fate. The leader's tone left no room for debate. The divine order has persisted for eons. It will not be upended by some ascended mortal, no matter how unusual his origin. The figures nodded in grim agreement, their veiled forms shimmering as they renewed their pact. The divine conservatives had marked their target, and their patience was as eternal as their existence. The game had only just begun. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Wings of Light. Morning. In the divine nexus brought a crystalline quality to the light that filtered through the high windows of Hestia's sanctuary. Naruto sat cross-legged in the haven of enduring will, eyes closed in meditation as he attempted to further refine his control over divine energy. After a week of practice, he could now manipulate his power with greater precision, though sudden emotional spikes still occasionally triggered unintended surges. Golden energy flowed around him in intricate patterns as he shaped and reshaped it, forming barriers, weapons, and constructs that dissolved back into pure energy moments later. The exercise was similar to chakra control training he'd done as a shinobi, but the scale and nature of divine power made it vastly more complex. Your control is improving, Hestia observed from the entrance to the haven. She leaned against one of the trees that marked the boundary, her white dress contrasting with the amber glow of the sanctuary. Naruto opened his eyes, letting the energy dissipate. It's still not where I need it to be. Everything happens too fast, too easily. It's like trying to pour a waterfall into a teacup. Divine power responds to emotion and intent more directly than chakra. Hestia reminded him, stepping into the clearing. You're still approaching it like a technique to be mastered through repetition. Try thinking of it as an extension of yourself, a language rather than a tool. Easy for you to say, Naruto said with a half-smile. You've had thousands of years to practice. True, Hestia acknowledged with a laugh. But I remember the early days. The fires I accidentally started when I was annoyed, the earthquakes during arguments with my siblings. Zeus still hasn't forgiven me for that incident with the mountain. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Do I want to know? Probably not. Hestia's eyes sparkled with mischief. Let's just say half of what mortals call volcanic activity was really just family disagreements getting out of hand. She sat across from him in the clearing, folding her legs beneath her with casual grace. For all her ancient power, there was something refreshingly unpretentious about Hestia that had made the tea week in her sanctuary genuinely pleasant. Any word from Palutena? Naruto asked. Hestia's expression grew more serious. She sent a message this morning. The Credentials Committee is still deliberating about your status, but there are complications. What kind of complications? The Celestial Spire has formally requested to evaluate you. Hestia studied his reaction carefully. They're sending an emissary to observe your progress. Naruto frowned. The angels. Why would they care about me? The angelic hierarchy maintains the boundaries between mortal and divine realms. Any unusual crossing of those boundaries, like your ascension, falls under their purview. At least technically. Let me guess, Naruto said dryly. They're not thrilled about a mortal becoming a god. It's more complicated than that. Hestia traced a pattern in the ground with her finger, tiny flames following her movement. Angels have their own prophecies and portents. Something about your emergence has triggered significant interest among their seers. Before Naruto could ask what she meant, a chime echoed through the sanctuary, different from the usual notification of visitors. This sound was more resonant, almost musical in its complexity. Hestia looked up, surprise evident on her face. That's the formal announcement tone. The celestial emissary is already here. She rose quickly. We should greet them properly. Angelic protocol is extensive. Great, Naruto muttered, getting to his feet. More divine politics. They made their way from the haven to the main chamber of Hestia's sanctuary, Here the eternal flame burned steadily in the central hearth. The entryway beyond had transformed, expanding into a more formal reception area with high ceilings and polished columns that hadn't been there before. Your sanctuary changes, Naruto asked quietly as they approached the entrance. It adapts to necessity, Hestia explained. The hearth understands the importance of proper reception. Particularly for guests of significant divine rank. Standing in the doorway was a figure that radiated light so pure it was almost difficult to look at directly. As Naruto's eyes adjusted, he could make out a tall, slender woman with golden hair that fell past her waist in gentle waves. She wore flowing white robes with gold trim, and behind her spread 12 wings of pristine white feathers that occasionally shimmered with rainbow light when they caught the sun. Her face was breathtaking in its perfection, features so harmonious they seemed almost unreal, like a sculpture idealized beyond human possibility. But what struck Naruto most were her eyes, a clear, luminous blue that held both ancient wisdom and an unexpected gentleness. Lady Gabriel, Hestia said, bowing her head respectfully. The hearth welcomes you. The angel smiled, and the entire chamber seemed to brighten. Lady Hestia, guardian of the sacred flame. I thank you for your welcome. Her voice was melodious, each word carrying musical undertones that lingered pleasantly in the air. Her gaze shifted to Naruto, studying him with open curiosity rather than the suspicion or disdain he'd come to expect from many divine beings. And you must be Naruto Uzumaki, the god of determination and protection. Your emergence has created quite a stir in the Celestial Spire. Naruto wasn't sure of the proper protocol for greeting an angel, so he settled for a respectful nod. That seems to be happening a lot lately. Creating stirs, I mean. Gabriel's laughter was like distant bells. Indeed, unusual ascensions tend to have that effect. She folded her wings slightly, making her presence less overwhelming. I hope you don't mind my observation mission. The Seraphic Council was most insistent. I'm getting used to being watched, Naruto said honestly. Though most observers aren't quite so. He gestured vaguely at her radiance. Bright, Gabriel suggested with a hint of self-deprecation. I apologize. I can modulate my divine presence if it's uncomfortable. It's fine, Naruto assured her, surprised by her consideration. Most powerful beings he'd encountered in the divine nexus seemed to flaunt their divine aura without concern for others' comfort. Hestia gestured toward the main chamber. Please, join us by the hearth, Lady Gabriel. It's rare that we host one of the seraphim. Gabriel followed them into the chamber, her wings folding closer to her body as she moved. Despite her ethereal appearance, there was something almost self-conscious about her movements, as if she were trying not to take up too much space. I hope my presence doesn't disrupt your training schedule, Gabriel said as they settled near the eternal flame. The council merely wishes for a first-hand account of your abilities and progress. Why? Naruto asked directly. What does the celestial spire care about one new god? Gabriel hesitated, glancing at Hestia before answering. There are concerns about the nature of your ascension. The simultaneous death of 9 divine adjacent entities, your tailed beasts, combined with your sacrifice created a power confluence that registered throughout the divine realms. They weren't divine, Naruto corrected automatically. They were chakra constructs. Semantics, Gabriel said with a gentle smile that reminded him unexpectedly of Hinata. From our perspective, beings of Concentra, Ted's spiritual energy powerful enough to rival minor gods qualify as divine adjacent, regardless of their origin. So I'm being watched because my ascension was loud. Naruto still felt there was something she wasn't saying. Partly, Gabriel acknowledged, but also because of certain prophecies that have recently become active. Prophecies concerning a god born of mortal sacrifice who carries the essence of multiple divine beasts. Naruto sighed, leaning back. There it is again. Everyone keeps mentioning prophecies, but no one will actually tell me what they say. Gabriel and Hestia exchanged glances. Divine prophecies are complex, Hestia explained carefully. They're rarely straightforward, and premature knowledge of them can sometimes influence events in unpredictable ways. In other words, you don't trust me with the information, Naruto said flatly. It's not a matter of trust, Gabriel said, her voice gentle but firm. Think of it as similar to knowing too much about your own future. It can lead to choices made from fear or desire to fulfill a prophecy, rather than from genuine intention. Naruto was about to press further when a new chime sounded, sharper and more urgent than the previous one. Hestia frowned. That's a formal summons. From the Divine Conclave. For who? Naruto asked. All of us, Hestia replied, looking troubled. It's the tone used for mandatory attendance. Gabriel's expression grew serious. This is unexpected. The Conclave rarely issues mandatory summons except in cases of divine trial or judgment. Trial. Naruto straightened. I haven't done anything to be put on trial for. Let's not assume the worst, Hestia said, though her worried expression belied her words. Perhaps it's merely a formal recognition of your status. None of them believed that. But they made preparations to depart nonetheless. As a gesture of respect to the conclave, Hestia changed from her simple white dress to more formal attire, a flowing gown of amber and gold that seemed to capture and reflect the light of the eternal flame. She instructed Naruto to wear the formal divine robes that had been created for him, which he donned with reluctance. I feel ridiculous in this, he muttered, adjusting the elaborate collar of the orange and gold garment. It's like wearing the Hokage robes, but someone bedazzled them. Divine formal attire is an important symbol, Gabriel explained. Her own appearance unchanged. Angels, apparently, were always appropriately dressed for any occasion. It represents your domains and your place within the divine order. If I had a place within the divine order, I wouldn't be constantly summoned to defend my existence, Naruto pointed out. Neither goddess could argue with that. They traveled to the divine conclave V, a celestial pathways, shimmering bridges of light that connected the various divine domains within the nexus. Unlike his first visit, which had been overwhelming in its novelty, Naruto now noticed details he'd missed before. The way certain paths seemed to avoid each other, the subtle boundaries between pantheons, territories, the watchful sentinels positioned at key intersections. The divine nexus was not just a realm of power and beauty, it was a carefully balanced political ecosystem, with alliances, rivalries, and neutral zones maintained through ancient agreements and careful diplomacy. The conclave itself had transformed since Naruto's previous visit. Instead of the open gathering space he remembered, it now resembled a formal court. Tiered seating surrounded a central dais where 5 ornate thrones stood occupied by figures of obvious authority. Divine beings of all descriptions filled the seating, their combined auras creating a pressure in the air that felt almost solid. As they entered, hundreds of eyes turned to watch them. Naruto recognized a few faces from his previous visit, including Apollo, who sat among a group of similarly perfect-looking deities, and Loki, who read a mocking salute from a shadowy corner. Palutena was already present, seated near the front row. She caught Naruto's eye and gave a subtle nod that somehow conveyed both encouragement and warning. The central figures are the High Pantheon representatives, Hestia whispered as they moved toward designated seats near the front. They convene only for matters of significant divine importance. That doesn't make me feel better, Naruto whispered back. Once they were seated, a tall figure in flowing robes of midnight blue rose from the central throne. His features seemed to shift subtly as he moved, as if reality itself couldn't quite decide on his appearance. This conclave is now in session, he announced, his voice resonating throughout the chamber without seeming to raise in volume. I am Kronos, elder god of time and continuity, presiding over this gathering. Naruto recognized him as the god who had intervened during the confrontation at his first visit. Up close, the ancient deity's power was even more palpable, like standing next to the ocean and feeling its immeasurable depth and force. We are convened to address the matter of Naruto Uzumaki, ascended mortal, claiming domains of determination and protection. Kronos continued. His unusual emergence has raised questions requiring formal evaluation. A murmur rippled through the assembled gods. Naruto kept his expression neutral, though internally he bristled at the implication that he needed their approval to exist. The Divine Credentials Committee has reviewed the circumstances of his ascension and finds them unprecedented, Kronos stated. The simultaneous confluence of sacrificial death, multiple divine adjacent essence absorption, and mortal realm crisis has no parallel in our records. Another god rose, a stern-looking woman with silver hair and eyes like polished steel. I am Themis, goddess of divine law. Our concern is not merely the method of ascension, but its implications. The domains med by this entity, determination and protection, have significant overlap with existing divine authorities. My domains chose me, Naruto said clearly, rising from his seat. I didn't claim anything. His interruption caused another wave of murmurs, some disapproving, others curious. Addressing the high representatives without being invited to speak was apparently a breach of protocol. Kronos, however, merely inclined his head. The entity speaks truth. Divine domains do select their vessels based on compatibility. This is not in dispute. What is in dispute, continued a third representative, a massive figure with golden skin and 4 arms, is whether this vessel is worthy of such domains. I am Vishnu, preserver of worlds. Protection is a sacred responsibility, not to be entrusted lightly. The entity's mortal history demonstrates consistent application of protective principles, Kronos noted. Our observations confirm this. Mortal history is not divine qualification, countered Themis. Divine power requires divine understanding. The debate continued among the representatives, with Kronos seeming to argue for a moderate approach while Themis pushed for stricter evaluation. Throughout it all, Naruto sat silently, increasingly aware that they were discussing his fate as if he weren't present. Finally, after what felt like hours, Kronos raised a hand for silence. The conclave has heard sufficient debate. We must now determine a course of action regarding this matter. A new figure rose from among the assembled gods, not one of the representatives, but a tall, angel with 6 wings of burnished gold and eyes that glowed with internal light. His presence caused even the representatives to pause. The celestial spire wishes to be heard on this matter, he announced. His voice carrying the same musical undertones as Gabriel's, though lacking her warmth. Archangel Raphael, Kronos acknowledged. The conclave recognizes the celestial spire's interest in this case. Raphael's gaze fixed on Naruto with clinical detachment. The angelic hierarchy proposes a solution that addresses the concerns of all parties. Let the entity undergo the trial of divine worthiness, the Labyrinthus Divinitatis. The announcement caused immediate reaction throughout the conclave. Gods leaned forward in their seats, expressions ranging from shock to anticipation. Beside Naruto, Hestia inhaled sharply, her hand moving unconsciously to grip his arm. The labyrinth has not been invoked in millennia, Themis observed, though she looked intrigued rather than opposed. It is a severe test. The circumstances warrant severity, Raphael replied coolly. If the entity passes, his worthiness is confirmed beyond question. If he fails, the archangel left the consequence unspoken. What's the labyrinth? Naruto whispered to Hestia. An ancient trial, she whispered back, her expression worried. A construct of pure divine energy that tests the very essence of a god's nature. It's dangerous, Naruto. Gods have been destroyed attempting it. Chronos turned his shifting gaze to Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki, you have heard the Celestial Spire's proposal. The Labyrinthus Divinitatus will test not only your power, but your understanding of your domains and your worthiness to wield divine authority. Do you accept this challenge? All eyes in the conclave turned to Naruto. He felt the weight of their attention, their judgment, their skepticism. For a moment, he was reminded of the academy days, when he'd been the outcast, the one everyone expected to fail. He stood slowly, straightening to his full height. Before I answer, I have a question. Chronos inclined his head. Speak. If I pass this test, will the questions about my right to exist as a god end? Will I be recognized formally, with all the rights and authorities that come with that recognition? The elder god of time considered him with eyes that had witnessed the birth and death of universes. The Labyrinth's judgment is binding on all pantheons. Success would grant you full divine status, beyond challenge or revocation. Then I accept, Naruto said without hesitation. A ripple of surprise moved through the assembly. Few had expected him to agree so readily to a trial known for its danger. Raphael's expression remained impassive, though something like surprise flickered briefly in his luminous eyes. The entity shows confidence. Whether that is wisdom or foolishness remains to be seen. It is decided, Chronos declared. The trial of divine worthiness will commence at the next celestial alignment, 3 days hence. The entity will be permitted 2 companions to accompany him to the labyrinth's entrance, though they may not enter with him. As the assembly began to disperse, discussing the unexpected development among themselves, Gabriel approached Naruto, Hestia, and Palutena, who had joined them as soon as the formal proceedings concluded. That was unexpected, Palutena said, her expression troubled. The labyrinth is not a test I would have recommended at this stage of your development. It wasn't your idea, Naruto asked Gabriel, surprised. The angel shook her head, looking genuinely concerned. No, I was sent to observe, not to recommend trials. Raphael's intervention was not part of my mission parameters. It's a power play, Hestia said, her usual cheerfulness replaced by serious analysis. The Celestial Spire is asserting authority over your case, positioning themselves above the pantheons in this matter. But why? Naruto pressed. What do they gain from testing me specifically? Gabriel hesitated, glancing around to ensure they weren't being overheard. The prophecies I mentioned earlier, they're particularly significant to the angelic hierarchy. If you are indeed the god they refer to, your emergence could herald changes that some in the spire find concerning. What kind of changes? Naruto asked, growing frustrated with the constant vague references. Before Gabriel could answer, they were interrupted by Archangel Raphael, who approached with several lesser angels flanking him. The entity will be sequestered until the trial, Raphael announced without preamble. Standard protocol for the Labyrinthus Divinitatus requires isolation and purification. That's not necessary, Palutena objected. He's already a divine being, not a mortal undergoing ascension rites. The protocols are absolute, Raphael stated flatly. The entity will accompany us to the preparation chambers. His name is Naruto, Gabriel said suddenly, her melodious voice carrying a surprising edge. Not the entity, and as his assigned observer, I should be present during his preparation. Raphael turned to her, golden wings flaring slightly in what Naruto recognized as a display of dominance. Your observation duties are suspended, Gabriel. The Seraphic Council has assigned me to oversee this matter personally. On whose authority? Gabriel asked, standing her ground. I received no notification of reassignment. Mine, Raphael replied coldly. As your superior in the hierarchy, I have the right to reassign as circumstances demand. Gabriel's blue eyes narrowed slightly, the first indication of defiance Naruto had seen from the seemingly gentle angel. With respect, Raphael, hierarchy protocols require formal notification through the proper channels. Without it, my assignment remains active. The Archangel's expression hardened. You question my authority. I uphold proper procedure, Gabriel corrected smoothly. As we all must, especially in matters of such importance. The tension between them was palpable. Naruto sensed this was not merely about protocol, there was history here, and perhaps conflicting agendas regarding his situation. I have no objection to the preparation chambers, he interjected, drawing both angels' attention. But I'd prefer Gabriel's continued presence. She's been respectful and forthcoming, which is more than I can say for most divine beings I've met so far. Raphael regarded him with cold assessment. Your preferences are irrelevant, Naruto Uzumaki. Divine law dictates. Actually, Hestia interrupted, her voice carrying unexpected authority. As one of the elder Olympians, I should point out that the candidate for the labyrinth has traditional right to select one companion during the preparation period. It's in the original protocols, established by the first conclave. Raphael's jaw tightened, but he couldn't dispute Hestia's claim. The goddess might appear youthful and carefree, but as among the oldest divine beings in existence, with intimate knowledge of ancient divine law. Very well, the Archangel conceded with poor grace. Gabriel may accompany the entity, Naruto Uzumaki, during preparation. But all other protocols will be observed without exception. With that, he turned and departed, his golden wings rigid with barely suppressed anger. Thank you, Naruto said to Gabriel once Raphael was out of earshot. For standing up for me. And for using my name. The angel smiled, though concern still shadowed her eyes. It was nothing. Basic courtesy shouldn't be exceptional, even among divine beings. What was that about? Palutena asked Gabriel quietly. That felt personal. Gabriel sighed, a surprisingly human gesture from the ethereal being. Raphael and I have different perspectives on how the celestial spire should interact with other divine realms. And on the interpretation of certain prophecies. The ones about me, Naruto guessed. Yes, Gabriel admitted, though this isn't the place to discuss it further. Hestia squeezed Naruto's hand reassuringly. We'll help you prepare as much as possible before you have to go to the preparation chambers. The labyrinth is dangerous, but not impossible. Quote, have you done it? Naruto asked her. No, Hestia said with a slight smile. My ascension to godhood was rather more traditional. Being born to titans tends to simplify the credentialing process. But I've known gods who have completed it successfully. And those who haven't. Naruto pressed. The three goddesses exchanged glances. They were unmade, Palutena said finally. Their divine essence returned to the cosmic flow, their consciousness dissolved. In other words, they died, Naruto translated. Permanently. Yes, Gabriel confirmed softly. But you won't. I believe your domains, determination and protection, are particularly well suited to the labyrinth's challenges. Her confidence was unexpected but welcome. Despite having just met her, Naruto found himself trusting Gabriel's assessment more than he might have expected. Then we have work to do, he said, feeling the familiar rush of determination that had carried him through countless challenges in his mortal life. 3 days isn't much time to prepare for a test that could unmake me, but I've faced worse odds. That's the spirit, Hestia said with a grin, some of her usual cheer returning. Besides, if anyone can defy divine expectations, it's the ninja who made a career of impossible victories. The next 2 days passed in a blur of intense preparation. Naruto divided his time between Hestia's sanctuary, where he continued refining his divine energy control, and Palutena's knowledge chambers, where she provided what limited information existed about the labyrinth's challenges. The Labyrinthus Divinitatus is unique for each participant, Palutena explained as they reviewed ancient texts in her vast library. It manifests challenges specific to the god's domains and personal nature. So I can't prepare for specific obstacles? Naruto asked, frustration evident in his voice. Not exactly, Palutena said. But there are consistent elements. The labyrinth always tests 3 aspects of divinity: power, understanding, and essence. Power is straightforward enough, Naruto reasoned. It's testing how strong my divine abilities are. Yes, but not just raw strength, Palutena cautioned. It will test your control, your precision, your adaptability. Divine power without restraint is as likely to fail the test as insufficient power. And understanding, Naruto prompted, the comprehension of your domains. What determination and protection truly mean, not just in abstract terms, but in application. How they interact with the cosmic order, with other divine domains, with mortal existence. Palutena's expression grew serious. This is where many gods fail, particularly those with unconventional ascensions. They possess the power but lack the deeper understanding of what their domains represent. Quote, an essence. The most difficult to explain, Palutena admitted. Essence is who you are as a divine being. Your nature, your purpose, your place within the greater tapestry of existence. The labyrinth will test whether your essence is truly aligned with your claimed domains. Gabriel, who had been quietly listening, added, think of it as testing wet. You're truly the god of determination and protection, or simply a powerful being who happens to use those aspects. Naruto absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with his understanding of himself. So I need to be strong, but controlled. I need to understand what my domains really mean. And I need to be authentically myself. Precisely, Palutena confirmed. The labyrinth sees through pretense. It tests the truth of your divinity. The good news, Hestia chimed in from where she was examining another ancient text, is that you already embody your domains naturally. You've lived determination and protection throughout your mortal existence. The challenge will be translating that mortal understanding to divine context. The night before Naruto was due to enter the preparation chambers, he found himself alone with Gabriel in the haven of enduring will. Hestia and Palutena had gone to make final arrangements, leaving the angel to continue Naruto's training. Gabriel had proven to be an excellent teacher, patient, insightful, and surprisingly practical in her approach to divine energy manipulation. Unlike many gods who relied on grandiose gestures and elaborate invocations, Gabriel's techniques were elegant in their simplicity. Divine energy responds best to clarity of intent, she explained as they practiced creating protective barriers. Complexity often introduces contradictions that weaken the manifestation. Under her guidance, Naruto had made significant progress. His barriers were now more focused, requiring less energy for greater effect. His offensive capabilities had similarly improved in precision, though they still lacked the raw power of his protective abilities. As they took a break, sitting beneath the eternal twilight of the haven, Naruto studied Gabriel curiously. Despite spending considerable time with her over the past 2 days, she remained somewhat enigmatic. Unlike Hestia's open warmth or Palutena's measured wisdom, Gabriel maintained a gentle reserve that made her thoughts difficult to read. Can I ask you something personal? Naruto ventured. Gabriel looked mildly surprised but nodded. Of course. Why did you stand up to Raphael for me? It seemed like a big deal for you to challenge him like that. The angel was quiet for a moment, her luminous blue eyes thoughtful. The angelic hierarchy is rigid. Questioning superiors is discouraged. Raphael is not just my superior in rank. He's one of the 4 original archangels, created before most other celestial beings. So you took a significant risk, Naruto observed. Yes, Gabriel acknowledged, but it was the right thing to do. Raphael's treatment of you was unnecessarily harsh, and his procedural shortcuts troubling. But why care about that? Most divine beings I've met couldn't care less how I'm treated. Gabriel's wings shifted slightly, catching the ambient light in iridescent patterns. Perhaps because I understand what it's like to be judged by others. Expectations rather than your own nature. The admission surprised Naruto. But you're perfect. The word escaped before he could consider how it might sound. Gabriel's laughter was unexpected. Not the musical sound he'd heard before, but something more genuine, almost human in its spontaneity. Hardly. I'm considered unusual among the seraphim. In what way? I lack the appropriate gravitas, she said with a hint of self-deprecation. Angels, particularly those of high rank, are expected to be remote, detached, focused entirely on cosmic balance and divine law. I've always been too interested in individual beings, too invested in specific outcomes. You care too much, Naruto translated. And that's seen as a flaw. In the celestial spire. Yes, Gabriel's wings folded closer to her body, a gesture Naruto had come to recognize as indicating vulnerability or discomfort. Compassion is acceptable in measured doses. Genuine emotional investment is considered dangerously close to the sin of attachment. That sounds lonely, Naruto said quietly. It can be, Gabriel admitted. Though I've never regretted my nature, even when it's caused difficulties with my superiors. Like Raphael, she confirmed. He represents the traditional view that angels should maintain absolute detachment from all matters except the divine order itself. He sees my approach as compromising our purpose. Naruto considered this. And the prophecies about me. Where did they fit into all this? Gabriel hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. There are predictions about a god who would rise from mortal origins, carrying the essence of multiple divine beasts. A god whose domains would bridge mortal and divine concerns in unprecedented ways. That's still very vague, Naruto pointed out. Intentionally so, Gabriel acknowledged. But the key point of contention is what this god represents. Raphael and his faction believe such a being threatens the Establish head divine order, a disruptive force that could undermine the separation between mortal and divine realms. And what do you believe? Gabriel met his gaze directly, her blue eyes unwavering. I believe change isn't inherently threatening. That perhaps the divine order could benefit from perspectives shaped by mortal experience rather than eternal detachment. The implications of her statement hung in the air between them. She wasn't just talking about abstract philosophical differences, she was taking a definite side in what appeared to be a significant divide within the celestial hierarchy. That's why you volunteered to observe me, Naruto realized. You wanted to see for yourself. Yes, Gabriel confirmed, and I've seen enough to know that the traditional fears are misplaced. Your Devi, nay, nature doesn't threaten cosmic balance. If anything, it reinforces the fundamental principles of protection and perseverance that underpin multiple pantheons. Try telling that to Raphael and the divine conservatives, Naruto said with a wry smile. Words won't convince them, Gabriel replied. But your success in the labyrinth might. It would be irrefutable evidence of your divine worthiness. No pressure, Naruto muttered. Gabriel smiled, the expression transforming her perfect features from remote beauty to something more approachable, more real. You faced the 10 Tails, united the shinobi villages, and saved your world multiple times. I suspect the labyrinth will find you a formidable challenger. Her confidence was genuinely touching. Thank you, Naruto said simply, for seeing me as more than just the entity, or the ascended mortal. Thank you for reminding me why my supposedly flawed perspective matters, Gabriel replied softly. They continued training until Hestia and Palutena returned. But something had shifted between them, a mutual recognition of shared outsider status that created an unexpected bond. The following morning, Naruto prepared to depart for the preparation chambers. As promised, Gabriel would accompany him, while Hestia and Palutena would meet him at the labyrinth's entrance when the trial began. Remember everything we've practiced, Palutena advised as they stood at the entrance to Hestia's sanctuary. Trust your instincts, but temper them with conscious control. And don't let them intimidate you with all their ceremonial nonsense, Hestia added. Adjusting Naruto's formal robes, the preparation chambers are designed to be imposing, but they're just rooms with fancy lighting when you get down to it. Naruto smiled at her practical assessment. I'll try to remember that. One last thing, Hestia said, suddenly serious. She removed a small amulet from around her neck, a simple disc of amber with a tiny flame seemingly suspended in its center. This contains a spark of the eternal flame. It won't help you in the labyrinth directly, but it might provide comfort during the isolation period. Naruto accepted the gift, touched by the gesture. The amulet was warm against his palm, pulsing gently like a tiny heartbeat. Thank you. We'll be waiting for you when you emerge victorious, Palutena assured him. Both at the entrance and after. Gabriel stepped forward, her wings spreading slightly. We should depart. The celestial escort will be waiting. As predicted, a contingent of angels was waiting at the designated meeting point, a crystalline platform hovering above the main thoroughfare of the divine nexus. They were led by a stern-faced angel with 4 wings who introduced himself as Uriel, keeper of trials. The candy, Date will now be taken to the preparation chambers, Uriel announced formally. All personal items must be surrendered before entry. Naruto reluctantly handed over Hestia's amulet, which Uriel placed in a small box of white metal. This will be returned upon completion of the trial, the angel assured him, his tone making it clear he considered this outcome unlikely. The journey to the Preparatio End Chambers was unlike anything Naruto had experienced in the Divine Nexus so far. Rather than the usual pathways of light or teleportation methods he'd seen other gods use, the angels created what appeared to be a tunnel of pure white energy that bypassed the normal structure of the realm entirely. The preparation chambers exist in a separate dimension, Gabriel explained quietly as they traveled. A neutral space beyond the influence of any specific pantheon or divine power. The tunnel deposited them before a structure that defied conventional architecture. It appeared to be a perfect cube of white marble, without windows or visible doors, floating in an endless void of soft blue light. The only feature on its smooth surface was a complex sigil etched in gold at its center. Uriel approached the sigil and placed his palm against it. The marble rippled like water, creating an opening just large enough for them to enter single file. The candidate will remain here until the appointed hour, Uriel stated. The observer may stay until the purification ritual begins, then must depart. The interior of the cube was both simpler and more elaborate than its exterior suggested. The single large chamber was empty of furniture, but its walls, floor, and ceiling were covered in intricate patterns of silver and gold that shifted constantly, forming and reforming divine symbols from countless pantheons and traditions. The chambers record the essence of each candidate, Gabriel explained as Uriel and his escorts departed. The patterns you see are a reflection of your divine nature interacting with the accumulated knowledge of all previous participants. It's beautiful, Naruto admitted, watching as symbols he recognized from his own world, the Uzumaki spiral, the Konoha leaf, Then the seal pattern that had once contained Kurama, appeared momentarily in the swirling designs before dissolving back into the greater pattern. The preparation period has 3 phases, Gabriel continued. Reflection, purification, and alignment. I can stay through reflection, but must leave before purification begins. What happens in each phase? Naruto asked, trying to focus on practical matters rather than the growing anxiety he felt about the coming trial. Reflection is the longest, approximately 12 hours of isolation with minimal external stimuli. You're meant to meditate on your divine nature and domains during this period, Gabriel explained. Purification is a ritual cleansing of lingering mortal attachments and concerns, and alignment attunes your divine energy to the labyrinth itself, ensuring compatibility when you enter. Sounds intense, Naruto commented, trying to keep his tone light despite the ominous descriptions. Gabriel's expression softened. It is, but the process itself isn't dangerous, just the trial that follows. She hesitated, then added, I've requested permission to meet you at the labyrinth entrance along with Hestia and Palutena. Raphael approved that, Naruto asked, surprised. No, Gabriel admitted with the faintest hint of a mischievous smile. But Uriel did, and he's the official keeper of trials. His authority supersedes Raphael's matters directly related to the labyrinth. Naruto chuckled. You're not as rule-bound as you first appeared. I respect the spirit of rules more than their letter, Gabriel replied. Particularly, when the letter is being manipulated for agenda rather than justice. They spent the remaining hours before purification discussing the limited information available about the labyrinth itself. Gabriel shared what she knew about previous trials, though as Palutena had explained, each participant's experience was unique. The most important thing to remember, Gabriel emphasized, is that the labyrinth doesn't want you to fail. That contradicts everything I've heard so far, Naruto pointed out. The others focus on the danger, which is real, Gabriel acknowledged. But the labyrinthus divinitas wasn't created as a punishment or an obstacle. It was designed as a crucible, a place where true divine nature is refined and confirmed. Its purpose is revelation, not destruction. Unless I'm not worthy, Naruto added quietly. Gabriel regarded him steadily. Do you believe you're unworthy? The question caught Naruto off guard. Throughout his life, he had struggled with feelings of inadequacy, of not belonging. But his journey had taught him his own worth, not just as a shinobi or Hokage, but as a person who stood by his principles and protected those he cared about. "No," he said finally. "I don't know if I'm worthy by divine standards, but I've always tried to live according to what I believed was right. To protect others, to never give up, to find a path forward even when it seemed impossible. If those qualities don't align with what a god of determination and protection should be, then maybe I shouldn't be one." Gabriel's smile was radiant. "That answer alone demonstrates why you'll succeed, Naruto Uzumaki. True worthiness isn't found in power or knowledge, but in alignment between what you are and what you do." Before Naruto could respond, a chime resonated throughout the chamber, and the patterns on the walls began to pulse with increasing light. "The reflection phase is ending," Gabriel said, rising to her feet. "I must leave before purification begins." Naruto stood as well, suddenly reluctant to see her go. Despite having known her only a few days, her presence had become a reassuring constant amidst the upheaval of divine politics and upcoming trials. "Thank you," he said. "For everything." "I've done little enough," Gabriel replied modestly. "But I'll be waiting when you emerge from the labyrinth." She hesitated, then did something unexpected. She extended one of her pristine white wings and gently brushed its edge against Naruto's shoulder. The gesture sent a wave of warmth and light through him, like sunshine breaking through clouds after a storm. "A blessing," she explained softly. "It won't affect the trial, but it might provide comfort during the more difficult moments of purification." The chime sounded again, more insistent. "I have to go," Gabriel said, moving toward the entrance. "Remember what I said. The labyrinth reveals truth. Trust in yours." With those words, she departed, leaving Naruto alone in the shifting patterns of the preparation chamber. As the entrance sealed behind her, the light in the room dimmed, and the swirling symbols began to move with greater purpose, converging toward the center of the chamber where Naruto stood. The purification had begun. The process was unlike anything he had experienced before. The converging patterns surrounded him completely, forming a cocoon of light that seemed to penetrate his very being. It wasn't painful, exactly, but it was intensely uncomfortable, like having every cell of his body examined and rearranged simultaneously. Images from his mortal life flashed through his mind. Iruka acknowledging him for the first time, forming Team 7 with Kakashi, Sakura, and Sasuke, fighting pain, becoming Hokage, his children's births, his final sacrifice to save the village. Each memory was experienced with perfect clarity, then gently but firmly set aside, as if the purification process was cataloging his mortal experiences without removing them. When the light finally receded, Naruto found himself kneeling on the floor, breathing heavily as if he'd run for days without stopping. His divine robes had been replaced with a simple white garment that seemed to be made of pure light rather than cloth. The shifting patterns on the walls had stabilized into a single continuous symbol that encircled the entire chamber, a complex representation of his divine signature. The alignment phase that followed was more subtle but equally profound. The ambient energy of the chamber synchronized with his own divine power, creating a harmonic resonance that fine-tuned his abilities. It felt like the final adjustments to an instrument before a performance, minor corrections that would allow him to function at his optimal capacity. By the time the chamber's entrance reappeared, Naruto felt both exhausted and energized. As if he'd been completely taken apart and reassembled with greater clarity. The angel Uriel stood waiting, his expression as impassive as before. "The preparation is complete," Uriel announced. "The trial awaits." The journey to the labyrinth was brief but disorienting. One moment they were in the preparation chamber, the next they stood before a massive structure that seemed to be composed of pure divine energy rather than physical material. It resembled an enormous temple complex, its entrance flanked by towering columns of shifting light, but beyond the entrance, Naruto could see only swirling mist. As promised, Hestia, Palutena, and Gabriel waited near the entrance. Their expressions showed varying degrees of concern and encouragement, though they maintained formal composure in Uriel's presence. "The candidate may speak briefly with his chosen witnesses before entering," Uriel stated, stepping back to give them a moment of privacy. Hestia moved forward first, her amber eyes warm with encouragement. "Remember who you are," she said simply. "Not who they expect you to be." Palutena was next, her expression serene but her eyes conveying deeper emotion. "Trust your instincts, but guard your energy." The labyrinth is designed to test endurance as well as power. Finally, Gabriel approached, her wings folded close in formal posture. The labyrinth reveals truth, she reminded him softly. Your truth is your strength. Their confidence bolstered Naruto's resolve. Whatever awaited him within the mysterious structure, he would face it with the same determination that had carried him through countless challenges in his mortal life. I'll see you all when I'm done, he promised, trying to inject certainty into his voice despite his apprehension. Uriel stepped forward again. It is time. The Labyrinthus Divinitatus awaits its challenger. With a final nod to his supporters, Naruto turned and walked between the towering columns. The mist beyond the entrance enveloped him immediately, cool and thick, obscuring everything more than a few feet away. He continued forward, guided by an intuitive pull that seemed to draw him deeper into the labyrinth. After what felt like minutes or possibly hours, time seemed strangely fluid within the mist. The path before him suddenly cleared, revealing his first challenge. The mist receded to show a vast circular arena surrounded by high walls of what appeared to be pure energy. At the center of the arena stood a figure Naruto recognized immediately, despite the impossibility of his presence. Sasuke, Naruto whispered, staring at his oldest friend and rival. The figure looked exactly as Sasuke had during their final battle at the Valley of the End, young, powerful, radiating the dangerous charisma that had made him both Naruto's greatest challenge and most important friend. His mismatched eyes, one onyx black, one Rinnegan purple, regarded Naruto with familiar intensity. You always were slow to understand the obvious, Sasuke said, his voice a perfect recreation of the original. This isn't about friendship or bonds. It's about power. Naruto knew this couldn't be the real Sasuke. His friend was alive in the mortal realm. Decades older than this apparition. This was the labyrinth's creation, a manifestation designed to test him. What do you want? Naruto asked, maintaining his distance. To see if you deserve the power you've claimed, the Sasuke apparition replied, drawing his sword in a fluid motion. If you're truly worthy of godhood. Without further warning, the figure attacked with blinding speed, covering the distance between them in an instant. Naruto reacted instinctively, his body moving with the muscle memory of countless battles despite his transformed divine nature. He dodged the first strike, feeling the sword pass within millimeters of his face, and countered with a punch wreathed in golden divine energy. To his surprise, the Sasuke apparition caught his fist easily, unaffected by the divine power that should have been overwhelming to a mere construct. Is that all? The apparition mocked. Pathetic. You haven't changed at all. Still relying on raw power. Without understanding its true nature. The figure's grip tightened, and Naruto felt his divine energy being drained, absorbed by the construct holding him. Pain shot through his arm, not physical, but metaphysical, the sensation of his divine essence being forcibly extracted. Acting on instinct, Naruto channeled more power into his arm, trying to overload the drain, but this only accelerated the process. The Sasuke apparition smiled coldly as golden light flowed from Naruto into him, illuminating him from within. You still don't get it, the construct said. This is the power test. Brute force alone will fail you here. Understanding dawned on Naruto. This wasn't about who could channel more divine energy, it was about how that energy was used. He recalled what Gabriel and Palutena had emphasized: control, precision, adaptability. Instead of fighting against the energy drain, Naruto relaxed into it, but with a crucial difference. He changed the nature of the energy he was channeling, shifting it from raw power to something more refined, the essence of protection. The effect was immediate. The golden energy flowing from him transformed, becoming denser, more focused. When it reached the Sasuke construct, instead of being absorbed, it began to disrupt the apparition's form, creating fractures of light throughout its body. Better, the construct acknowledged, releasing Naruto's arm and leaping back. But still incomplete. The apparition raised its sword again, but this time the weapon transformed, becoming a staff of pure energy that pulsed with power. When it struck the ground, shockwaves of destructive force radiated outward, tearing through the arena floor toward Naruto from all directions. Naruto quickly created a barrier of divine energy around himself, but the CK waves passed through it as if it weren't there, slamming into him with devastating force. He was thrown backward, his divine form momentarily destabilized by the impact. Conventional defenses won't work here. The Sasuke construct called out. This is divine energy calibrated specifically against protection domains. You need to think beyond your instincts. Naruto rose to his feet, reassessing the situation. If conventional barriers wouldn't work, he needed an unconventional approach. Focusing his divine energy differently, he created not a shield around himself, but a network of golden threads that extended throughout the arena, connecting to the very energy that composed the labyrinth itself. When the construct struck again, sending another wave of destructive force, Naruto didn't try to block it. Instead, he redirected it through his network of energy threads, dispersing it harmlessly throughout the labyrinth's structure before returning a portion of it directly behind his opponent. The Sasuke apparition turned just in time to see its own attack emerging from thin air. It dodged, but not completely, the energy clipping its shoulder and disrupting its form further. Now you're beginning to understand, the construct said, sounding pleased despite the damage. Divine power isn't about quantity, it's about application. The battle continued, with the Sasuke construct employing increasingly sophisticated attacks and Naruto adapting his responses with growing creativity. Rather than meeting force with force, he learned to analyze the energy patterns of each attack and respond appropriately, sometimes redirecting, sometimes absorbing, sometimes transforming the energy into something new entirely. As the fight progressed, Naruto noticed the construct's attacks were becoming less about causing damage and more about testing the range and flexibility of his divine abilities. It was pushing him to explore aspects of his power he hadn't considered, forcing him to develop new techniques on the fly. Finally, after what felt like hours of continuous battle, the Sasuke construct stepped back and lowered its weapon. Enough, it announced. The power test is complete. Did I pass? Naruto asked, maintaining his guard despite the apparent cessation of hostilities. The construct smiled. Not the cold, mocking expression from before, but something warmer that reminded Naruto painfully of the real Sasuke's rare genuine smiles. You've demonstrated not just power, but control, adaptability, and innovation in its application. These are the true measures of divine capability. The figure began to dissolve into motes of light. Continue to the next chamber. The test of understanding awaits. As the construct disappeared completely, the arena around them transformed. The walls receded, and a doorway appeared where none had been before. Beyond it, Naruto could see another misty corridor leading deeper into the labyrinth. Taking a moment to center himself, Naruto assessed his condition. The battle had taxed his divine energy, but not dangerously so. His control had improved significantly through the continuous adaptation required during the fight. More importantly, He felt he better understood the nature of his divine power, how it differed from chakra, how it connected to the fabric of divine reality itself. With renewed confidence, he stepped through the doorway and into the next phase of the trial. The corridor seemed endless, the mist thick enough to obscure anything more than a few steps ahead. Naruto continued forward, guided by the same intuitive pull as before, until the path suddenly opened into a vast library. Bookshelves stretched in every direction, reaching impossibly high, filled with volumes bound in materials ranging from simple leather to what appeared to be solidified light. In the center of the library stood a figure that made Naruto's heart clench with unexpected emotion. It was Iruka Umino, his first teacher and earliest supporter, looking exactly as he had when Naruto was a young academy student. "Iruka-sensei," Naruto said softly, knowing this too was a construct but unable to suppress the wave of affection the familiar face evoked. "Not quite," the figure replied with Iruka's gentle smile. "I am the keeper of understanding, though I've taken a form your mind associates with knowledge and guidance." The test of understanding, Naruto recalled. "What do I need to do?" "Demonstrate comprehension of your domains," the keeper explained, gesturing to the endless shelves around them. "Not just intellectual knowledge, but true understanding of what determination and protection mean in the divine context." The keeper approached one of the nearby shelves and selected a volume bound in orange leather. "Each god who enters the labyrinth has a book that represents their divine essence." He held up the volume. "This is yours, though it remains largely unwritten. The test will determine what fills these pages." "How does it work?" Naruto asked, studying the blank book with curiosity. I will present scenarios, divine dilemmas related to your domains. Your responses will reveal your understanding, or lack thereof. The keeper's expression grew serious. Be warned. There are no simple right answers here. The test measures depth of comprehension, not adherence to predetermined solutions. With a wave of his hand, the keeper transformed the library around them. The bookshelves receded, and they suddenly stood in what appeared to be a mortal village under attack. Buildings burned, people fled in terror, and shadowy creatures rampaged unchecked. Though clearly an illusion, it felt disturbingly real. Your first scenario, the keeper announced. A mortal settlement faces annihilation from divine adjacent beings. As god of protection, how do you respond? Quote, Naruto's instinct was immediate, to jump into the fray and defend the villagers directly. But he hesitated, recalling Palutena's warnings about divine intervention in mortal affairs. I want to protect them directly, he admitted. But as a god, direct intervention might cause more problems than it solves. Elaborate, the keeper prompted. Divine power in the mortal realm can be destructive, even when well-intentioned, Naruto reasoned, drawing on his conversations with Palutena. And direct intervention creates dependency rather than resilience. So you would do nothing? The keeper asked neutrally. No, Naruto said firmly. I would empower those within the village who already possess the will to fight. Enhance their existing strengths, guide them subtly toward effective strategies. Ensure that key defenders are in the right place at the right time. As he spoke, the illusory scene shifted, showing villagers suddenly fighting back with unexpected effectiveness. A woman finding strength to lift debris that trapped her child, a young man discovering courage to lead others to safety, defenders coordinating with uncanny precision. Protection isn't always about fighting the battle yourself, Naruto continued, watching the scene unfold. Sometimes it's about enabling others to protect themselves and each other, creating the conditions for resilience rather than dependency. The keeper nodded, making a note in the orange book. Interesting. Most gods with protection domains default to direct intervention, shields, smiting enemies, physical barriers. Your approach emphasizes empowerment over substitution. The scene shifted again, this time showing a solitary figure climbing an impossibly steep mountain in harsh conditions. The climber repeatedly fell, suffered, but continued upward despite clearly being at the limits of endurance. Your second scenario, the keeper explained. As god of determination, a mortal prays to you for strength to complete an impossible task. The task itself is meaningless, the mountain holds nothing of value, but the mortal has committed to reaching its peak. What is your response? Naruto studied the struggling figure carefully. What's their motivation? Why climb a mountain with no reward? Does it matter? The keeper asked. They've invoked determination, your domain. It matters completely, Naruto insisted. Determination isn't just stubborn persistence. It's purposeful endurance toward meaningful goals. The keeper looked intrigued. So you would refuse aid because you deem their goal meaningless? No, Naruto said. I'd try to understand what the climb represents to them. Is it a personal test? A promise to someone? Grief processing? The meaning isn't in the mountain, it's in what the achievement symbolizes to the climber. And if you determined their motivation was worthy, then I wouldn't make the climb easier, Naruto said firmly. That would undermine what they're trying to prove to themselves. I'd ensure they had the fair chance to succeed on their own merits. Perhaps clear unnatural obstacles, ensure weather doesn't become deadly, prevent outside interference. But the challenge itself, the struggle, that needs to remain. Why? The keeper pressed. Why not simply grant them the strength to succeed easily? Because determination is forged through difficulty, Naruto explained. Thinking of his own life journey. It's not about avoiding hardship, it's about finding the strength to persist through it. Removing the challenge negates the very quality being developed. The keeper wrote more extensively in the orange book, his expression thoughtful. Most gods with determination aspects focus on outcome, ensuring success regardless of process. Your understanding centers on growth through struggle rather than achievement itself. The scenarios continued, each more complex than the last. Naruto faced dilemmas involving conflicting protectorates, questions about when determination becomes harmful stubbornness, cases where protection of one group meant vulnerability for another. Throughout it all, he relied not on abstract divine principles, but on the wisdom gained through his lived experiences as a shinobi, Hokage, and human being. After the final scenario, a particularly challenging moral dilemma involving protection of free will versus protection from harm, the illusory scenes faded, returning them to the vast library. The test of understanding is complete, the keeper announced, holding up the orange book which now appeared filled with text. Your responses reveal an unusual perspective for a divine being. Is that good or bad? Naruto asked cautiously. Neither. It is simply distinctive. The keeper studied him thoughtfully. Most gods approach their domains from positions of authority and distance. Your understanding is rooted in experience and empathy. You comprehend protection not as a barrier between danger and the protected, but as a foundation that enables growth despite danger. You see determination not as unyielding persistence, but as adaptive resilience toward meaningful purpose. The keeper placed the orange book on a nearby pedestal. Your understanding is fundamentally human in its origin, yet elevated to divine context through reflection and principle. It is refreshing. So I passed, Naruto ventured. Yes, the keeper confirmed. Though passed suggests a binary outcome that doesn't fully capture the nature of understanding. You have demonstrated sufficient comprehension of your domains to proceed to the final test. The library began to fade around them, the countless books dissolving into motes of light. The keeper, still wearing Iruka's face, offered a final smile of encouragement. The test of essence awaits, he said as he too began to dissolve. Remember that while power tests capability and understanding tests comprehension, essence tests truth. Be not what you think a god should be, but what you truly are. With those cryptic words, the keeper vanished completely, leaving Naruto alone as a new doorway appeared among the fading bookshelves. Beyond it lay darkness rather than mist, a profound, absence of light that seemed to swallow everything it touched. Taking a deep breath, Naruto stepped through the doorway and into the void. The darkness was absolute, consuming all light including the ambient glow of his divine form. Naruto couldn't see his own hand in front of his face, couldn't sense any boundaries or dimensions to the space around him. It was as if he had stepped outside of existence itself. Hello, he called, his voice sounding strangely flat, as if the darkness absorbed sound as well as light. No response came, but he felt a subtle shift in the void around him, an awareness that seemed to permeate the darkness, studying him with ancient, patient interest. I am the labyrinth, came a voice that wasn't really a voice, more like concepts forming directly in Naruto's mind. And you are Naruto Uzumaki, god of determination and protection. Or so you claim. I don't claim anything, Naruto responded, speaking to the darkness. Those domains chose me, not the other way around. An interesting perspective, the labyrinth noted. Most gods jealously claim ownership of their domains, viewing them as territories to be defended rather than responsibilities to be fulfilled. Naruto felt the darkness moving around him, shifting like a living entity examining him from all angles. You have passed the tests of power and understanding. Now comes essence, the core of what you are. What do I need to do? Naruto asked. Nothing, the labyrinth replied. Essence cannot be performed or demonstrated. It simply is. This test reveals rather than challenges. The darkness began to recede, not giving way to light but rather transforming into a reflective surface that surrounded Naruto completely, a mirror that showed not his physical form, but something deeper. In the reflection, he saw his divine energy laid bare, the complex patterns and connections that made up his true nature exposed for examination. Curious, the labyrinth commented. Your divine essence retains distinct traces of your mortal origin. Most ascended gods shed these completely during transition, viewing them as limitations to be transcended. Within the reflection, Naruto could see golden threads of divine power interwoven with what appeared to be his original chakra pathways, transformed but not erased. The structure was unlike anything he'd glimpsed in other gods, who seemed composed of pure divine energy without such mortal foundations. Is that a problem? Naruto asked, concerned that this difference might constitute failure. Not a problem, a distinction. The labyrinth's presence moved closer, examining the reflection more intensely. More interesting still is the integration pattern. Your mortal experiences aren't merely preserved, they're foundational to your divine nature. Our domains don't override your original self, they extend from it. The reflection shifted, highlighting specific patterns in Naruto's divine essence. Here, your protection domain manifests not as abstract divine authority, but as an extension of your human desire to safeguard those you value. And here, your determination domain resonates with your mortal history of perseverance against overwhelming odds. That makes sense, Naruto said. I can't separate who I was from who I am now. They're the same person, just with different capabilities. Precisely, the labyrinth agreed. And therein lies the essence question. Are you a god who once was human, or a human who now wields divine power? The question hung in the darkness, seemingly simple yet profoundly complex in its implications. Naruto considered it carefully, understanding that his answer would define not just this test, but his entire divine existence moving forward. Neither, he said finally. And both. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, the same person I've always been, with the same core values and principles. Divine power hasn't changed that, just as becoming Hokage didn't fundamentally change who I was as a shinobi. I've gained new responsibilities and capabilities, but my essence remains consistent. The reflective surface rippled, as if responding to his words. An integrative perspective rather than a transformative one. Most unusual. Is that wrong? Naruto pressed. Does being a god require abandoning my human perspective? There is no wrong in matters of essence, the labyrinth clarified. Only truth or falsehood relative to one's actual nature. The question is whether your perspective accurately reflects your true divine essence, not whether it conforms to conventional divine paradigms. The reflection surrounding Naruto began to pulse with golden light, highlighting the perfect harmony between his mortal foundation and divine power. There was no conflict between them, no hierarchy of divine over human. Instead, they reinforced each other, creating something unique in the process. Your divine essence is authentically integrative, the labyrinth confirmed. Neither human nor god in the conventional sense, but a true synthesis that honors both aspects equally. This is unprecedented in the labyrinth's records. Is that a problem? Naruto asked again. No, the labyrinth replied, and Naruto had the distinct impression that if an ancient cosmic construct could sound amused, this one did. It is merely significant. The labyrinth has tested thousands of gods over eons, yet never encountered one whose essence so completely reconciles mortal and divine aspects without subordinating either. The reflective surface began to dissolve, returning to ordinary darkness that gradually lightened to reveal a simple circular chamber with a single exit. At the center of the chamber floated a small object, a medallion of gold and silver, inscribed with symbols representing Naruto's domains. The test of essence is complete. The labyrinth announced. Take the token of recognition. It is proof of your successful completion of the Labyrinthus Divinitatis and formal confirmation of your divine status. Naruto approached the floating medallion cautiously. That's it. I've passed all 3 tests. You have, the labyrinth confirmed. Though, passed, implies a judgment the labyrinth does not make. The trials reveal truth. They do not bestow worthiness where it does not exist, nor withhold recognition where it is deserved. As Naruto reached for the medallion, the labyrinth added, a final observation, if I may. Of course, Naruto replied, hand pausing mid-reach. Your unique essence, this integration of mortal foundation with divine power, carries significant implications for the divine order. Traditional boundaries between realms may prove permeable to one of your nature. This will concern many established powers. I've noticed, Naruto said dryly. Indeed, but it may also represent an evolution long overdue. Divine realms stagnate without occasional disruption. The labyrinth's presence began to recede. The labyrinth does not predict or prescribe, it merely observes. And what it observes in you, Naruto Uzumaki, suggests change approaches. That sounds ominous, Naruto commented, finally taking the medallion. It was warm to the touch, pulsing gently with divine energy that resonated with his own. Change always does to those invested in the status quo, the labyrinth noted. Whether it proves beneficial or destructive depends on those who guide its course. With those parting words, the labyrinth's presence faded completely, leaving Naruto alone in the chamber with his token of recognition. The exit before him now glowed with golden light, clearly marking the way out. As he approached the exit, Naruto reflected on the trials he'd faced and the insights they'd provided. He better understood his divine power now, its nature, its application, its connection to his core self. More importantly, he felt confirmed in his instinct that becoming a god didn't require abandoning his human perspective. The very qualities that had defined his mortal existence, his determination, his protective nature, his emphasis on bonds and connections, were now the foundation of his divine domains. The exit led to a short corridor that brightened progressively until Naruto found himself emerging between the same towering columns he'd entered through, stepping out of the labyrinth and back into the divine nexus. As promised, Hestia, Palutena, and Gabriel waited nearby, along with a formal delegation of divine representatives including Kronos, Themis, and Raphael. Their expressions ranged from pleased surprise, Hestia, to satisfied confirmation, Gabriel, to poorly concealed disappointment, Raphael. The entity emerges, Uriel announced formally. Bearer of the token of recognition. The Labyrinthus Divinitatus has spoken. Kronos stepped forward, his shifting features settling momentarily into an expression of dignified acknowledgement. Naruto Uzumaki, god of determination and protection. The divine conclave recognizes your successful completion of the trial of Worthines. And formally acknowledges your place among the divine pantheons. Themis followed, her severe expression unchanged but her tone respectful. The token of recognition grants you full divine status, with all rights and responsibilities therein. Your domains are confirmed without further challenge. Finally, Raphael approached, his golden wings rigid with formality. The celestial spire acknowledges the labyrinth's judgment, he stated. Each word seemingly forced. Your divine credentials are uncontestable. The formalities complete, Naruto was finally able to approach his supporters. Hestia abandoned all pretense of divine dignity, rushing forward to embrace him with genuine warmth. I knew you'd succeed, she exclaimed. The look on Raphael's face alone was worth the wait. Palutena was more reserved but equally pleased, clasping his hand firmly. Well done. The labyrinth is no small achievement, especially for one so newly ascended. Gabriel approached last, her blue eyes shining with quiet pride. The labyrinth revealed your truth, she said softly. Just as I knew it would. Looking beyond them, Naruto noticed the gathered divine representatives dispersing, many casting GHTFUL or concerned glances his way before departing. Only Kronos lingered, observing the reunion with ancient, unreadable eyes. What happens now? Naruto asked his companions. Now, Hestia said with a grin, we celebrate properly. No more formal robes or diplomatic niceties, just good food, better company, and the satisfaction of proving the divine conservatives completely wrong. That sounds perfect, Naruto admitted, suddenly aware of the mental and spiritual exhaustion the trials had left him with, despite his success. As they prepared to depart, Kronos approached their group, his eagle's presence commanding immediate attention. A moment, if you please, the elder god requested. I would speak briefly with our newest confirmed colleague. The others hesitated, looking to Naruto for guidance. It's fine, he assured them. I'll meet you at Hestia's sanctuary. Once they had moved a respectful distance away, Kronos regarded Naruto with increased focus, his shifting features temporarily settling into a more defined appearance. The labyrinth speaks to me, the ancient god said without preamble. It shares observations that might prove relevant to the cosmic balance I maintain. And what did it share about me? Naruto asked directly. That you are precisely what the prophecies foretold, though not as many have interpreted them. Kronos' expression remained neutral, but his eyes held something like cautious interest. The integration of mortal and divine aspects within a single being, without hierarchy or division. The potential bridge between realms that have remained separate since the earliest divine compact. Why are you telling me this? Naruto asked, sensing there was more to this conversation than simple information sharing. Because change approaches, Naruto Uzumaki. Change that will challenge assumptions older than most gods' existence. Kronos gestured subtly toward the departing divine representatives. Many will resist, as they always have. Others will attempt to control or direct. A few will embrace without understanding the consequences. And you, where do you stand? A ghost of a smile touched the ancient god's face. I am time itself. I neither resist nor embrace. I observe. I record. I continue. But in my observation of countless cycles, I have noted that change, when it comes, proceeds most beneficially when guided by those who understand both what was and what might be. Quote, "You think that's me?" Naruto asked, incredulous. "I think you occupy a unique position," Chronos corrected. "Neither fully invested in the old order nor ignorant of its value. A being of both worlds in the truest sense." He stepped back, his form beginning to blur at the edges as if he were already departing. "Consider this not advice but observation. The path before you has not been walked before. Those who would guide you along familiar routes do you no service, however well intentioned." With those cryptic words, the elder god seemed to dissolve to the ambient light of the divine nexus, leaving Naruto alone with his thoughts and the weight of implications he was only beginning to understand. As he made his way toward Hestia's sanctuary and the celebration that awaited, Naruto couldn't shake the sense that his successful completion of the labyrinth marked not the end of challenges, but the beginning of something far more complex. The token of recognition hung heavy around his neck, proof of his divine status yet also a reminder of the expectations and responsibilities that came with it. For now, though, he would celebrate this victory with the few gods who had shown him genuine support and friendship. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new oppositions, new mysteries to unravel. But tonight, at least, he could take satisfaction in knowing that he had faced the divine order's ultimate test and emerged not just successful, but confirmed in his conviction that being a god didn't require abandoning his humanity. In fact, if the labyrinth was to be believed, that humanity might be exactly what made him worthy of divinity in the first place. In the highest tower of the celestial spire, far above the divine nexus, Archangel Raphael stood before a wall of pure crystal that showed scenes from across the divine realms. Currently, it displayed Naruto and his companions celebrating his success in Hestia's sanctuary, their expressions relaxed and joyful in the warm light of the eternal flame. "The mortal-born god has passed the labyrinth," Raphael stated to the shadowed figure who stood behind him. "More concerning, Gabriel continues to associate with him, against the spire's interests." "Not unexpected," the figure replied, its voice neither male nor female but something in between, resonant with ancient power. "The labyrinth was always a calculated risk. Better to have him formally recognized and thus bound by divine protocols than operating outside established parameters. And Gabriel, she follows her nature," the figure said dismissively. "As she always has. Her compassion for lesser beings is a known weakness, but potentially useful in this instance. Let her continue for now. Her presence provides us valuable insight into the mortal-born's activities and intentions." Raphael turned from the crystal wall, his golden wings shifting restlessly. "The prophecy speaks of a thrice-bonded god emerging from mortal sacrifice. If this Naruto Uzumaki is indeed that figure, then we must ensure those bonds form in ways that serve the greater balance," the figure concluded. "The prophecy cannot be prevented, but it can be shaped, guided toward outcomes that preserve rather than disrupt. And if guidance proves insufficient..." The shadowed figure moved closer to the crystal wall, studying the scene with ancient eyes that had witnessed the birth of stars and the death of universes. "Then more direct measures may become necessary. But not yet. For now, we watch, we learn, and we prepare." As they observed the celebration in Hestia's sanctuary, neither noticed the small glowing figure that hovered momentarily outside the tower window before darting away, trailing golden light in its wake. The game had indeed begun, and more players were taking their positions than even the celestial spire recognized. Chapter 3 End.